Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the February 10th, 2022 hearing of the Milton Board of Appeals at 7 p.m. And this is the continued applicant of Adams Court Developers LLC regarding a Chapter 40B application called the Residences at East Milton Square. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals. With me this evening is with the other multiple hearings we've had on this application, our attorneys Jeffrey Mullen and attorneys Nick Gray. So the purpose of this meeting is to continue to make progress in this case and see where we are at the end of the evidentiary aspect of it. We received multiple letters from neighbors, abutters, and interested citizens, and we thank all of the neighbors for their interest in this project and the application. All of those letters are going to have been, I think, posted, except the ones that came in very late this afternoon, and they will be posted on the Board of Appeals website. Additionally, on February 8th, the board received a letter from Jennifer Corcoran, the project director for the Corcoran Companies, enclosing additional materials in response to some of the requests by the peer reviewers and various plans and design changes and the like. And they've been also posted on the board, and perhaps Mr. Freeman will refresh us on that. We also have received a letter of February 10th, 2022 from Sean Reardon of Tetra Tech, addressing his previous correspondence to the applicants and their expert witnesses and the status report on the progress that's been made on the engineering side of the street. And we did also receive a letter from the Milton Board of Select Persons dated February 9th, 2022, making several comments regarding the application and enclosing additional materials for consideration by the board. Both the Tetra Tech letter of February 10th and the Board of Select Persons letter and materials have also been posted with the board. And we also did receive a letter on February 10th, 2022 by attorney Robert W. Galvin, who is the attorney for the East Milton Neighborhood Association. And that letter is in multiple pages. It looks like it's approximately 7 pages of detailed comments and analysis on the project as he sees it and his clients see it, and to which is attached draft conditions that the abutters are proposing be attached to any application that the board may allow here, and those various draft conditions are in multiple pages dealing with multiple aspects of the project. So on behalf of the board, I'd certainly like to thank Bob Galvin for his submittal. It's very helpful, it's very well written, and it'll be extremely helpful in filing a decision regarding this application. So I think, Mr. Freeman, if it's fine with you, we'll offer you the floor and see what you want to do regarding Jen Corcoran's letter and submittals, and what additional information or comments you may have regarding this application. So welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Peter Freeman, Freeman Law Group, representing the applicant. And we are going to keep it straightforward. Jen Cochran will just go over what was submitted and some of the highlights. The team is here, all members. Should the board or anyone else have any questions, we certainly can answer them. We feel as though, in addition to the great progress, which I think was acknowledged at the last hearing, which we appreciate, tonight we have followed up, and a few days ago, noted sorry. I don't know why my iPad gets interrupted by phone calls, so sorry about that. But in any event, We have responded to the outstanding items. We certainly believe satisfactorily. And although I would say a few words in closing, because I think we will get to that point later, we want to thank everybody again for very professional and thorough peer review and a very thorough review. And we look forward to Jen now describing things and then hearing questions and reactions as you all see fit. So without further ado, I'll just let Jen give that summary.
Great. Welcome back to the board, Ms. Corcoran.
Thank you very much, Chair Leonard. So yeah, we just wanted to give a very brief overview of what was submitted earlier this week for the board and participants in the hearing tonight. So we submitted a full set, which included, as requested, roof plans, clarifications regarding the fact that the roof systems will not be visible from the pedestrian level. An updated landscaping plan that addresses some concerns regarding the plantings that we had specified earlier, and a lighting plan as well. So those were all included in that set. Another key issue that we addressed and since the last hearing was the emergency vehicle access. The team met with Chief Madden and Mr. Reardon, as well as Mr. Serwinski, and emergency vehicle access has been added to the plans in a manner that seems satisfactory to all parties. Also, I just want to note too that the building will be fully sprinklered. I think that's important when we're talking about fire safety, to just add that in. We also provided a lease between the Falcones and Welch Management, just to review the fact that the lease is going to run out soon and will be month to month after that. And I also wanted to address, we've received many letters over the past couple of days, and wanted to address the fact that we have been meeting with Mr. Welch, since the inception of the project. He doesn't really share the concern that he'll be put out of business. I want to just make sure that is not in any way an intention of ours. And Mr. Welch seems pretty comfortable with that. Would have liked to have him here tonight, but it's prime dinner time right now at Abbey Park. So that wouldn't seem appropriate. So just wanted to make sure that we touched on that. We updated the list of waivers as well. And then we also just wanted to touch on the transportation demand management measures that we're planning to take. So we did present this back in June of 2021, but we wanted to affirm what we discussed last meeting. The team is more than willing to provide MBTA passes to residents who are choosing to forgo a parking space. Another, additional TDM measure is the fact that we will be charging for parking. So if you choose to not bring a car, you will be handsomely rewarded by saving money on the parking and also getting a T-Pass if you so choose. We mentioned before that the building will be professionally managed. So, parking, loading and move-ins and deliveries will also be managed and, put in time slots to be appropriate so as to, mitigate disruption to the neighborhood. We'll encourage use of public transportation by having a transit screen in the lobby of the building, and also provide orientation packets to new tenants and residents that has information not only about, I know that there's been some concern over the fact that we're relying too heavily on the MBTA. I don't want to make it seem like we are. TDM is kind of more wide ranging than that. We have bike infrastructure as well, covered bike room. We've discussed with Mr. Serwinski the possibility of blue bikes or a similar service coming to town in the future, and we have space for that. So there's that. And then there's also just making sure that people are aware of kind of the distance and the walkability of the neighborhood. As we've mentioned a bunch of times, there's really no better place in Milton to not have to have a car. You have access to pretty much everything you could possibly need. We also, a while ago, changed the unit mix to reflect a larger unit, more larger unit types. So that will allow people to maybe, get a 2-bedroom and work from home a little bit more. Working from home is pretty big right now. So we want to make sure that we're accommodating that. And just providing information on travel alternatives to residents and visitors via the website and via, that information packet that we were talking about. Exploring the bike share and, having the external bike racks as well. So that is pretty much, those are the updates since the last meeting. The building is currently at 92 units and 112 parking spaces. And that's the latest from me. I'll keep it short and sweet tonight.
Good. Maybe I can ask you one question before I go to my colleagues. And I don't want you to disclose any confidential communications that you may have had with Vance Welch. the manager of the restaurant. But do you have a sense from talking with him that he is confident that other arrangements can be made so that the restaurant can handle changes in its present parking situation and operate in a successful and reasonable manner?
Yes, I think honestly, Vance is probably sick of us at this point. We've met with him and talked to him a bunch over this matter. And we've identified a few different options for him throughout the town. And we've been in touch with Mr. Sherwinski on this issue from the very get-go as well. So Vance at no point has expressed to us that he would be run out of town if we proceed with this project as currently presented. So he's comfortable with it. And I just wanted to put that on the record that, to address the concerns that we've been hearing over the past couple of days.
Okay, that's great. Mr. Jeffrey Mellon, do you have any questions of Ms. Corcoran regarding her presentation this evening or any of the material that she submitted to the board on February 8th, 2022?
So when you say T-Pass is being provided to the occupants who opt out of parking, is that a T-Pass of their choice?
So we're willing to work on that with you, whether it is, a month or a year, either one would be fine with us. I don't know, what you had in mind really, whether it's 6 months, whether it's a month. But, we just wanted to express a willingness to do that. Obviously, it probably wouldn't be in perpetuity, but to just get people used to taking that modality. And I assume too that these would be people who would probably already be using that modality anyway. But, just making people aware that, it is a transit-oriented space.
Well, my suggestion was that to incent them to opt out of the parking, to free up that parking for other people and to expand the guest parking, which is so limited. That's really the goal.
Yeah.
So I was thinking for so long as they're opting out of the parking, they would get the transit benefit. But I mean, that's that's the way it would work, it seems to me. But I mean, I just made the suggestion. I think the proposal is going to come from the applicant. So that's why I'm asking the question. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I mean, we hadn't gotten really into specifics in the last hearing, so we just wanted to, I had kind of capped it at a year on my spreadsheet, but we could all obviously go back and revisit that, obviously at the board's request. But I mean, I think that the trade-off too is that you will be saving money, up to $150 a month, depending on what the market value of that parking space is at the time. So in order to incentivize somebody, a lot of buildings will do, first month free or something in order to, incentivize people to rent there. This would be a similar type of deal where it would be probably a limited time just because of the financials of it. But so that was kind of what we were thinking, either, a month, 6 months, or a year.
Well, I look at the concerns that have been expressed, and I want to, in my mind, I think it'd be helpful for us to have a list of the things that are being done to mitigate the traffic issues that people seem to be or are concerned about. This is a big one. I know the transportation demand management program is good, but that's pretty standard. And frankly, would have been expected and is in pretty much every project these days. So this would be over and above. It'd be a little bit more innovative, but I don't think the board can design it for you folks. So that's what I'm struggling with. So maybe we'll move on. I mean, that's just where I am on that. Can I ask you? You gave us the lease. This is for Navarra.
So it's with Welch Management, and that is just the lease that is currently being operated under.
Right, so I'm confused. So last meeting, we talked about Abbey Park.
Mm-hmm.
And it was said that Navarra is not leasing it. They're at they're at another property on Church Street, I think. Is it being leased to for both restaurants?
So, I mean, in the documentation, Peter, you can probably step in here.
The answer is this, that the Navarro parking is at 4 Church Street. I believe that's the address, not the 40B locus. That I believe has a lease, that restaurant. The lease has run out on Abbey Park, and so there's nothing to show. It's a month-to-month situation, which Mr. Welch knows. I don't think there's any intention, of before the project is built, but once the project is underway, of course, he knows that that parking won't be available. So that's the explanation of the actual situation on the restaurant parking.
This lease, the lease that was provided is with Navara for the property.
Yeah, I think that there's a discrepancy between what is on the planning board approval for the Abbey Park site, because that is the only place on the town's records that lists for Franklin Street as a designated parking space for that space, for that commercial space.
Well, let me ask this, who is the property being used by? What third party is using the property now, whether it's a lease or a tenant at will arrangement?
It's Abbey Park. It's Abbey Park technically.
Okay, so why do we have this lease?
That is the lease between the management group. So I think it's a little bit confusing as Mr. Welch is involved in both of the restaurants and it's managed by his restaurant group.
Yeah, okay. I think the record's not clear on this point, John. I made my point before about there's been, I think, well, whatever, this doesn't, I don't think we know what's going on the lot, at least based on the stuff that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I can only say that, I spoke with Mr. Falcone. Perhaps I missed the detail on that lease somehow in a muddy way being now transferred to cover the Navarro restaurant. It had been, I'm told, the Abbey Park. But, I have been told in no uncertain terms that there is no lease, that it's a month-to-month situation with Abbey Park.
Right, but now we've got a document that's been submitted to the board that shows it's being leased to Navarro.
Well, if there's a mix-up in that, I apologize. I know that that's not the case. If Mr. Falcone is in and if he can speak now or later, that's fine. Again, I'm just trying to convey what I know, and if that was confusing, I apologize. Have to take responsibility for it. I apologize.
No further questions at this time.
Okay, Jen, at the risk of further complicating things, just let me ask you this. To the best of your knowledge, do you agree with your attorney, Mr. Freeman, that the lease here has expired and Abbey Park is on a month-to-month basis? Is that what Mr. Vance Welsh understands, to the best of your knowledge?
It's my understanding that the lease will run out in March, at which time it will become month-to-month. Tenant it will.
Okay, and despite the lease expiring in March, whether by agreement of the parties or by the operation of the lease, is it fair to say that the applicant is committed to working with Mr. Welch and the Abbey Park folk to secure reasonable and adequate parking, and so that he's not disadvantaged as a result of the application?
Certainly. And I mean, Mr. Serwinski has been present for a couple of those conversations as well. So I'm not sure if he wants to weigh in here, but it's been definitely something that's been on the top of our priority list for the duration of the hearing.
Tim, do you want to be heard on this issue of the Abbey Park parking situation?
Certainly. Thank you. Everything Jen is characterizing the situation accurately. As far as the conversations that I've been involved in have gone. I've spoken with Vance. I've spoken with parties that Vance is in negotiations with to secure alternate parking arrangements. It's obviously a fluid situation. It's not a situation that has been resolved as of yet. But I don't think there's anyone from my office, from the applicant, from Vance's office, from the planning board that isn't committed to finding a solution to this problem. Abbey Park and Navarra, all of Vance's restaurants are really important kind of anchors in East Milton Square, and we're all committed to looking at those permits and finding arrangements that work for Vance and amending those approvals in a way that gets them up to par and in compliance. So, it's still a situation that has moving pieces with it, but Jen's team has been really good about working with Vance, and we'll continue to work together to figure this thing out.
Okay, great. Thanks for your update, Tim. That's very helpful.
I'm
Let me,
sorry, John, can I just,
Yes,
is there
sure.
actually an Abbey Park lease? It doesn't
So
sound
it's-
like there is.
It's the same management company, and so I think that there's a little bit of confusion with the paperwork, but in practice, it's, it's Vance Welch's management company leasing spaces from the Falcones.
Okay, all right. So what we've got, the lease that we have, which is for Novara, is really the Abbey Park lease is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, that's all. Just say it. That's what it
I
sounds
mean,
like.
I tried to.
You didn't. Now we know. I mean, you gotta work with us here. We need the facts.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Mullen, for your comments. Let me ask Board Member Nick Gray, do you have any questions of Ms. Corcoran, please?
I don't know if this is the time to bring it up, or whether it would be later in the hearing, but I am, given the very great weight of letters and emails that we've gotten concerned about traffic, delivery, parking, all of those issues, which frankly, going into this hearing many months ago, pretty much could predict was going to be the case. I'm very concerned about the current plan for deliveries to the premises, whether they're Amazon or UPS or FedEx or moving in. And I at some point I wouldn't mind going over again, just for my benefit and for the benefit of folks watching, what exactly are the steps being taken to mitigate the 92 units worth of deliveries and move-ins to the premises. I've heard, I think there's no loading dock. So I think the basic idea has been to, the trucks will come in underneath the off the Franklin Street entrance into the parking lot. They have to be able to fit underneath the top floors of the building. And there's not, I've looked at the plans. I don't really see a spot for them to pull over and offload that doesn't block the flow of movement of cars and vehicles in and out of there. And we all know the Falcones and the Corcorans are long-time East Milton people. They know exactly, how serious the congestion is over there. And I need to be assured that we're not creating, by approving this project in its current configuration, that we're not creating a multi-decade problem. This building is going to be, obviously it's a large building. It's going to be well built. It's going to be there. Well, I don't know, a very long time. And 92 units worth of people living there are going to have delivery needs and moving in and out needs and all of that. And we just have to get this right. We absolutely have to get it right. This is not a surprise that this is an issue. And I guess I haven't seen yet anything in the design that makes me feel confident that we're not creating I don't know what the right word is. I was going to say a monster, but we're not just, creating a real problem with deliveries. I've been over there, this is anecdotal. I get it. I'm not a traffic engineer. I'm a lawyer, but it's just absolute chaos with the current deliveries. It's like I never go by. It's hardly ever a time I go down in the Franklin Street area where I don't see an 18-wheel truck parked there or parked on Adams Street in front of Starbucks, delivering to one of the restaurants, delivering to the Starbucks. And I get that it's an enforcement problem. It's right. There's no parking there. That's not legal. It's so part of it's on, I suppose on the town to enforce it. But practically, I just don't want to be adding to that problem. So this is a very long-winded question. I guess I'm just trying to either now or at some point in tonight's hearing to go over again the delivery parameters so that we can just be sure that this is going to work.
Certainly. So one of the factors too that I do want to bring up is that, the front door address will bring you into the courtyard. So if somebody's using GPS, which most delivery drivers do, they will be directed into the courtyard. Most of the vehicles that do deliveries can be accommodated in there. We've looked at the clearances. I know Frank did a study a while back about the heights of the UPS trucks and the FedEx
Yeah.
trucks and the Sprinter vans and all of that. And so when somebody is directed to that address, they will be directed to the courtyard, bringing them off the street and kind of out of the neighborhood's hair. In
Yep.
terms of like, there is, for larger trucks that won't be able to potentially pull into those two spaces that we've designated for loading for, food deliveries or Uber pickups or what have you. Smaller Sprinter vans can fit in there, but a larger truck will not be able to, in which case it will be blocking in about 6 parking spaces in our own parking lot. However, we're pretty comfortable that in the time that it will take for them to unload whatever packages they have, the turnover rate in a residential property is much lower than it is for a commercial property. And so the odds we're comfortable with, somebody maybe getting blocked in for a minute or 2 or 5. But I think that will happen pretty infrequently. Obviously, it's impossible to say, but maybe it will be a strategy of ours to, if we know that somebody's working from home or will be using their car a little bit less, then we can assign them those spaces instead of having those be assigned to somebody who's in and out very often, which, I mean, again, it's impossible to know, but with the management company that we have, I'm confident that they'll be able to kind of manage and be flexible in terms of, addressing problems as they arise.
All right, so a moving truck comes in to stock a 3-bedroom, some of the units are 3-bedroom, and where does it park? Is it parked in the aisle? How, obviously that we have to have a plan for that to be managed.
So in move-ins, there are 2 spaces that are perpendicular to Franklin Street that are in the interior of the island. They're the only 2 compact spaces on the surface lot. In the event of a moving truck coming in, the management company will block off a certain period of time at which those spaces that are guest parking spaces will be unavailable, roped off. There's also a loading zone that's attached to those 2 spaces. And so within that time frame, that will be the allotted time for that household to move in or get their furniture delivery or whatever it may be. So the moving actually is solved for a little bit greater than the day-to-day deliveries in a larger truck. But we've also found that most of the deliveries that are coming through Amazon and everything are in those kind of smaller, more nimbler vehicles. But moving has been addressed actually pretty well.
Okay, so so is it fair to say, I mean, I'm just trying to visualize it, right? So when the moving truck comes in, it's fair to say that there's still flow, like cars aren't going to be,
Yes.
who are coming in will be able to make the loop around in that great turning diagram that you showed us, right?
Yes, a 2-hour block wouldn't work out, but
Yeah.
well, the moving vehicles will allow for circulation.
Okay, all right.
And just to try to help, only to say, number one, I certainly absolutely respect the question. I understand those are, concerns, and we do believe we've addressed it. But our traffic expert, Carrie Pike, has the plan ready to screen share, so she could go over it if you all would like.
I leave that up to Chairman Leonard.
Oh, if you'd like it, let's do it now since we're discussing it. If Ms. Pike is available, let's have analysis.
All right.
Hi, Ms. Pike. Welcome to the board.
Thank you. Just give me 1 second. Can everybody see that? I hope. And is it big enough?
It's spinning, so I don't know if it's hit the screens. Not for me yet.
I don't have it.
I have your name.
It says it started screen sharing, but it's spinning.
Okay, let's give it a minute. It's up on my end, but if you all aren't seeing it yet.
Carrie, it's still black. It's just.
Yeah, let me stop and try it again. It's seems to be frozen on my end. Uh-oh, everything's frozen on my end. You guys can still hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
My screen is frozen, but I can still hear all of you. All right, so much for technology. Sorry about that, folks. Give me a minute. Let me see, I don't know what else to do to try to get it unfrozen.
Well, would you like us to move on and you can work on that issue and we'll come back to you?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Sorry about that.
Okay, that's fine. I made a big note to come back to you. So on that one. Let me ask Tim Sisinski, do you have any questions of Jen Corcoran on her presentation?
Not at the moment. One thing, Mr. Leonard, that I will note, and we can wait until the sort of the general public comment period opens up, but we do have Denny Swenson and Meredith Hall from the Planning Board in the audience. I think they were interested in offering a few comments and proposed condition language at an appropriate time. I think we can, again, may not be specific to this particular issue, but they're out there when we get to public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just ask Sean Reardon. Mr. Reardon, do you have any questions of Jen Corcoran on her presentation?
No questions. I thought she did a really nice job explaining things. The one thing I would say to maybe help assuage some of Nick's concerns, the courtyard isn't a fait accompli in terms of, unlike the building placement, the courtyard in the future could get redesigned, relaid out if we found that the circulation didn't work. So there is an opportunity to reset curb, to redo parking within that courtyard. I don't think there's anything that precludes that from happening in the future should things not work out as well as we think.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Appreciate very much. Mr. Bomer, is Cliff Bomer here? And does he have any questions of Jen?
He's not with us this evening, Mr. Chair. He's not at the meeting tonight.
Okay. Let me just ask generally, Bev, is there anybody who's present who has a question of Ms. Corcoran?
No, Kerry's hand is up, so.
Maybe she.
So is
Okay,
Bob.
let's go to Carrie Pike again and we'll find out if she's got her system working.
Yeah, let's see. I seem to have unfrozen myself, so let's see if we can make the screen share work. Bear with me for a minute. Trying again. Now it says it's paused. Are y'all seeing that?
No, it still has.
Black screen again.
It says you're trying, but it says it's spinning like when things are being downloaded or uploaded.
I wonder, maybe I should send it to somebody else. I mean, it's in the package that we submitted, what I was going to pull up, but I don't know why it's not.
Carrie, I could probably pull that up if you'd like. Would you just like the courtyard plan?
Yeah, I was going to pull up the one that had the truck auto turn on it, but I just wanted to highlight for everyone the area that you were just describing that we're going to be using for move-in particularly. I don't know why my computer does not want to share on Zoom tonight. Sorry about that.
Split up, I think. Let me see. Everybody see my screen or no?
Yes.
Carrie, is one that you want to pull up?
That is the plan. Thank you, Frank. So you can see here, this is showing a truck entering. Frank, you may have to point for me at that area that Jen was just describing in the middle. That is the 2 visitor spaces and then the little hatched area. That's the area that we would use for move in, move out that Jen was talking about, that we would basically block off when we know someone is moving in, we know when they're going to move in, and they would be able to have that area for a certain time while they're moving in, or if they're getting a furniture delivery in a larger vehicle that maybe wouldn't fit in just one of those spaces or the hatched area.
Right.
Yeah, so that pink area. Thank you.
Okay, and Nick Gray, Nick, do you have any questions of Ms. Pike regarding the parking plan?
So I guess if I'm looking at this, let's take the truck that you've got on your screen there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's assume he's unloading something off the back, right? He hit the truck. So looking at the turn radius, how is he supposed to get into that pink space? They have to back in?
Yeah, they would have to back in.
So that the back, and okay, so if the truck is backing in the direction it's going, and the back of the truck is opposite of the building, what's on the, what would they be offloading onto? Is that space just open there? Is it a curb? I mean, it's very small.
Or the little area
Yeah, like the
just
back
to
of
the
the truck
bottom,
where,
just at the
where it's
bottom,
gonna
Frank, I
be,
think is what he's talking about, below the pink rectangle.
the bottom of the pink rectangle. How is it, what's the surface like there, you know? At
So
least as it's configured now.
I think that's a landscaped area, but Jen or Frank, can you confirm that? The area just below, just underneath that's kind of in between the parking spaces that are in the middle there.
I mean, I think that the idea would be that the truck would come in, and, just like do its maneuvering and then just back out and just like be in that space. We haven't, I mean, this could be flush, it could be landscape, it could be anything that we need to do in order to accommodate that, would be from the analysis that we've done, we felt that a truck, and this is, Carrie, and I don't know how big this truck that you have designated here is. So this is a 30-foot. So this is
Yeah,
a 30-foot.
it's a single unit 30-foot
Yeah,
truck.
so it's an unusual large truck for the nature of what we'd be using to deliver here. But the truck could very readily, come in, pull back, and be there without really structuring anything. And, then cars could circulate around it. And this is just showing the 30-foot truck circulating around it. But we have, the idea of like, just smaller trucks or smaller cars circulating around it.
Yeah, and if there's a concern about the sort of the back of the truck, because the entry there is kind of in the elbow, right, of the building.
Yeah.
So the truck could also pull forward and then back along there to back into that pink area. So it would pull like it's leaving, but then it would back into that if it needed to do that.
See, to my eye, that looks like extremely tight maneuvering, and that you're going to end up with the truck in a position where it's going to be difficult to offload and then transport all of that material, that somebody's moving in with into the house. But that's just what it looks like.
Sure, but a 30-foot truck is we use the extreme nature, Nick, in this idea. A 30-foot truck can easily accommodate a 4-bedroom to 5-bedroom. Somebody moving into a 2-bedroom, which is most 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms, which is most of what we have. People would be using anywhere at most a 20-footer to move in. So we were trying to show the extreme nature in here, that it would work on the extreme nature. 30-footers very rarely do people rent a 30-foot truck to move into a 2-bedroom or even a 3-bedroom. But
yeah, I understand that. I guess in my experience, though, I mean, often moving trucks carry more than one person's load, and you may have two sets. It's whatever.
I would also say,
I hope you're right.
I would also say that some of that is going to be the communication between the management team for the building and the person who's moving in, right? To let them know the situation in terms of move in, move out, and how that works.
Okay.
So hopefully we can sort of head off that kind of issue, before it happens.
Yeah, well, it's an important issue. We've got 92 units. We've got, I don't know what the turnover is going to be like, but obviously, this could be a fairly common occurrence, and obviously any inability of that truck easily to fit into that space or even to make it in to that lot is going to end up on the street. So, or so, I don't know what else it'll do, like all the other trucks do right now. So, all right. Thank you very much.
thank you, Nick.
Okay, thank you, folks. Let me ask Bob Galvin. You have
Sorry,
any-
John.
Yes, Jeffrey.
While we're on that graphic, you don't have to put it back up, but is there also an issue with the height to get in there? That was one of the comments that we got this week.
So we went through this, Jeffrey, in which we analyzed as well all of the trucks, and I think that what proved in an analysis that the only truck that wouldn't be able to make it in was the largest truck that U-Haul has to offer, And I think that the largest truck basically is the 35-foot truck that moves a 4-bedroom. We could not accommodate that. But anything else that moves a 1-bedroom studio, a 2-bedroom, and a 3-bedroom, and everything else can go in there, even ambulances. But there's that one truck from U-Haul, the biggest one. We cannot accommodate that one, and that's the one that cannot go in there. And I think that we had submitted that earlier in that, and we tried.
What about the UPS truck?
They can make it in there. Ambulances can make it in there. And again, I think that, like you mentioned before, we are trying to accommodate for anybody to go in there. We cannot enforce for anyone to go in there. You know, the policing of the, Amazon trucks to go in there, we can't do that. But we did accommodate for the facilities from a height perspective and the parking perspective to be able to go in there. So we have accommodated for all of those things.
And one more question. What is the clearance?
The clearance right now is 10'4", I
10 foot.
believe.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Galvin, do you have any questions of Jen Corcoran regarding her presentation?
Just on the issues that we've talked about, I looked at the lease that I was provided, and I think Mr. Mullen has already hit on it. I looked at it, was the Novara lease. We've always been told it was Abbey Park, and it clearly relates to 4 Franklin Street, which is where the 37 parking spaces were. And the way I read it, it was a 3-year lease with 3 one-year options. So I think that would logically expire in March of 2022. But we also had Abbey Park. And I think if I'm clear, they think they can find a solution, but they don't have one, which means that the parking for Navarro and the parking for Abbey Park are these people got to park somewhere. But I don't know where they're going to park. And I know it's aspirational that they'll have a solution, but the answer is they don't have one. In terms of the delivery spaces, I think when you just look at the graphic that they've put up with the truck that they just had, it's pretty clear that there's no dedicated loading space. It requires an extraordinary movement even to park a truck in the 2 spaces that they'll have to apparently designate. If this is 92 apartment units, I think it's pretty fair to say that's going to be someone moving in and moving out all the time and probably multiple times per month. It's just by the law of averages, that would have to be the case. But that doesn't take into account the Amazons, the UPS trucks, the FedEx trucks, the delivery trucks that are now delivering people's meals. And I appreciate that there's a couple of restaurants that are close by and even a market close by, but then we don't even deal with the guest parking. The reality is these spaces just there's not enough parking here. And what happens out there on the street is going to happen further into the neighborhood when you add another 92 units. And, a lot of these units are not single bedroom units, and some of them are even multiple bedroom units. And, the reality is there's not enough parking here, and people will find it, and they'll find it in our neighborhood. And that's been one of our major issues. And instead of getting better on the parking ratios, they've gotten worse on the parking ratios, because what they originally gave you was a parking plan that didn't work. Now they've given you a parking plan that works better, but it requires you to grant them a waiver to have many more times compact spaces than are required. And, the reality is anybody with children is going to be in an SUV or a large SUV, and it's not going to be all sedans like they feel like they can fit into these compact spaces. And again, that all points to the people being in the neighborhood. And my very first presentation, I showed you the photograph of how people unload and load for the existing Adams Street businesses. It's going to be multiple times worse for us and for my neighbors.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Galvin. Mr. Freeman, I think the ball is back in your court.
Sure, I don't want to give any lengthy response to that. I leave it to the professionals. And in terms of what Mr. Galvin said, our expert did speak to it. Mr. Reardon commented, I don't think it's accurate to say that there are no dedicated park areas for the drop-offs of the truck. I would question as anecdotal, the frequency of delivery. I'm sorry, not deliveries, of actual move-in trucks, and both Frank and Kerry Pike explained that. So we are comfortable. And the only final thing I would say on that end, the parking, is it's still very much a management thing, not in any way to say, that you don't want to be concerned about it and ask the questions. As I said to Mr. Gray, I respect the question, but I think our answer is really very professional and very satisfactory. And it is substantially a management issue where, be it, the size of the vehicles, which my experience with multiple huge national developers doing projects all over Greater Boston and the Cape, that actually apartment residents don't per se have the big suburban SUVs. Now, my comment is just as anecdotal as Bob's, but that's my point. We don't really have any testimony or evidence other than what the professionals have said. So it's a management issue. The Corcoran Company, with their experience and expertise and concern about their own investment, they're not going to let a mess of a situation, if it happens, continue. They'll address it. And that ties in partially to what Mr. Reardon said, that it's not etched in stone forever. And oh my God, we can't try to, rectify it. So I'll rest with that.
Okay, and do you have any further presentation or evidence that you want to introduce this evening?
No, thank you. Other than just to remind the board, we do have the updated waivers, and if we get to that later, we're certainly willing to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask Tim Szynski. We did receive, Tim, a letter from the Board of Select Persons dated February 9th with materials attached. Do you or any member of the Board of Select Persons want to address that submittal? Or are you content with it just being filed and reviewed by the board? Tim, are you there? You may be off with your.
Sorry, I was on the other side of the room. I think that letter is relatively straightforward. I think it reiterates a lot of points that the select board made in their letter at the PEL stage. So I think it's just relatively straightforward. Expressing some of the same concerns, and maybe some additional commentary on obviously the importance of the provision of affordable housing through this project. But it's a relatively short letter, so I think it speaks for itself. So I think that's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let me see if my board members, do you have any questions regarding the letter of the Board of Select Persons dated February 9th, 2022? Mr. Mullen, do you have any questions regarding the letter of submittals?
No.
Okay, how about Mr. Gray?
No, thanks.
Okay, I noticed that Sean Reardon is present this evening, having participated a little bit at the beginning of the proceeding. The board did receive a letter from Tetra Tech signed by Mr. Reardon dated February 10th, summarizing the various issues and where comments have been resolved. Mr. Reardon, do you want to address your letter of February 10th, and perhaps without going through every individual item because it's in multiple pages, but can you give us a summary of your perspective on this application and any waivers which you believe are appropriate, which are set forth in your letter, published on the board website so that everyone can read it?
Yeah, just to recap, this letter is kind of a closeout letter, for lack of a better word. It really brings to an end point all our prior 60 some odd comments. I think as of the last letter we wrote, there were maybe 4 issues outstanding, the principal one being the emergency access issue, which I think has been fundamentally resolved right now. And I think the chief issued an email earlier today confirming his acceptance of the solution. There's some minor other details that are sort of hanging out there still, but nothing that can't be pushed off until a final set of plans are submitted with the building permit application. So this letter really is just a document that closes things out for the record, make sure everything is addressed either in a recommended condition or a comment that it's been addressed appropriately by the applicant.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Reardon. We appreciate your timely letter and your dedicated service on this application, which is very, very detailed. And thank you for staying with this, as we'd have difficulty staying with all of the comments as board members. Okay, thank you for that. I understand that Cliff Bomer is not present this evening. Is that right, Judy?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I think, Tim, do you want to, yeah, pardon me? Jeffrey?
Mr. Reardon, a few questions.
Of course you can. Yes, please. I'm sorry I didn't ask you.
No,
Go ahead.
sorry. Just thanks for the letter today. So the letter today, you talked about the fire chief. Is the issue that you raised with the fire chief, is that resolved with the testimony we heard tonight? Or do you still have that concern that you think can be addressed with an appropriate condition?
I think the plans as currently submitted, which were submitted earlier this week, show improvements at the Bassett Street side of the building that provide appropriate accommodation for the fire department's vehicles responding to something at that entrance. And I believe the chief issued an email today confirming as such.
He did.
So the chief's email addresses the issue that you raised in your letter.
It confirms that it has been addressed to his satisfaction.
Okay, all right. Did you see the letter from Mr. Galvin that stated that there was not going to be any earth removal on this site?
I have not seen that letter.
The letter said that. Is that true?
Is that a recent letter or?
Came in
Today, I think.
today. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see any possible way the project can be constructed without removing soil from the site.
Yeah. Okay. You're the one who raised the issue of exiting the site and the cross of the traffic on Franklin, and you're recommending left only?
Well, I think that's an appropriate thing to consider. I'm still a bit troubled by even the graphic that was just shown earlier shows any truck trying to come into that site from the right lane has to swing into the opposing lane of traffic on both Franklin Street and in the site driveway in order to navigate that turn. And to me, that's a, you know, not an ideal situation, to say the least. I think it can be remedied by simply requiring lefts in and lefts out only, because as everybody knows, it's a little bit easier and there's more room to take a left on, you know, from a roadway than it is to take a right to a right turn, because you've got the inside curb. So I think that would make things better. I'd leave it up to the applicant and the board to discuss what's practical, but I think that's an appropriate consideration.
But if we limit lefts, that's going to dramatically affect the traffic flow, no?
Well, I think it's
Limit to lefts only.
yeah. Well, I think it's more, I don't expect a high traffic volume from the courtyard. You know, it's not going to generate a lot of vehicles on a daily basis, so I wouldn't expect it to impact signal functionality or intersection functionality. I'm far more concerned about the larger vehicles and the unfamiliar vehicles using the site. So if we're restricted to just those, it would be a benefit and maybe provide a sort of a happy medium. But I think it's something I want to make sure people understand is the proposed design and the proposed service scenario requires vehicles to go into the opposing lane in order to navigate that turn.
Do you think they can actually get underneath that 10-foot 4-inch clearance?
Yeah, sure, they can get under it, but
The garbage truck can get in there?
I hope they mark it in there.
10 feet, 4 inches?
10 feet, we'll figure the 13.6 is the federal highway clearance requirement for a highway. So tractor trailers can comfortably make it under 13.6. 10.4 is, it's a pretty hefty accommodation. Parking garage is maybe 7 feet, 8 inches tall. So 10 feet 4 still will accommodate a lot of vehicles, but again, they're going to be navigating a curb, I mean, a sidewalk. So it's not like they're going smoothly under there. But again, if there's damage to the building, it's going to be the building that gets damaged. So in my sort of rationalization, they may have to learn the hard way that they can't get certain vehicles into their courtyard.
Well, I know, but if they can't get the service vehicles into the courtyard, where do they go? That's, I think, Mr. Gray's point.
Yeah, in that case, it's going to be a management issue. They're going to have to do what they can with the vehicles that they can use.
Did you see the waivers?
I took a cursory view of them, not a detailed view of them.
There's a request for a waiver of the town bylaws dealing with the Commonwealth's stormwater management requirements. Can that be waived?
We spoke to this early on. The certain components can be waived, but it needs to be in consultation with DPW. The reason I say that is because the project doesn't have a MS4 permit requirement. The town has it. So I think what they proposed here in the relief they requested related to the allowances for infiltration are reasonable waiver requests. I wouldn't support a blanket waiver from that requirement just because it could put the town in an awkward situation.
If I could speak to that just briefly, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Freeman. Yes, please.
Mr. Reardon is correct. And what we agreed on a closer reading of the local bylaw, which essentially says it incorporates the state, everything complies with the state. That local provision being considered as local, the one thing that we are asking for a waiver from, very clearly not a blanket waiver, is, and I was just looking for it on my screen and finally it opened, but it has to do with, I think, a 10-foot separation, Sean. I forget if it's from foundation to a stormwater piece of infrastructure. And that, so it's a very specific minor waiver that Mr. Reardon has said he's comfortable with. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Right, and I'll add to that, I requested that they confer with the DPW, which they have, and I believe Marina has indicated her acceptance of that waiver request.
If there's a situation where it's shown that we can't get these kinds of trucks that need to service this building in there, because it does seem to me like it's a smaller universe of trucks, then that was a big truck that we had on that turning template, it seemed to me. Is there another remedy? Can the building be modified to do that? I mean, I'm concerned not as much. I mean, obviously you're raising the horizontal clearance, but there's a big vertical clearance problem here.
Yeah, admittedly, I'm a bit less concerned about the vertical clearance, in large part because I know 10.4 is a pretty robust height. I'll admit I'm not that informed as to what specific vehicles that accommodate that height, but I believe Frank has addressed that at least in part in his prior testimony. I know it comfortably fits single unit vehicle trucks, the delivery trucks we're contemplating. I think it comes into question when you have specialty vehicles or tractor trailers, which I think are going to have a much harder time navigating laterally than vertically. So I'm a little less concerned about that. And also if it's a concern of the board, that certainly can be, the design can be modified to allow a bit more clearance under there. I mean, under no circumstances would they need anything more than 13.6. So, whether or not they have to, you do a little bit different structural design or do a little bit floor to floor height change, there are accommodations that can be made in the final design as well.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Nick, do you have any further questions as a result of the recent testimony?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, great. Then let me ask Mr. Sazinski. Tim, yeah, I think you mentioned that, I thought you said Melinda Collins, a board of a select woman, wanted to address the board along with somebody from the planning board on some additional conditions.
What I said was we have Denny Swenson and Meredith Hall, both from the planning board.
Sure.
Compliments all around for mixing those folks up there. Truly great public servants, all three, but we've only got two of them tonight.
That's great. So Denny, do you want to make a presentation on behalf of the planning board regarding conditions?
I just promoted her.
Oh, great. Thanks, Bev. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chair Leonard, and may I introduce Meredith Hall as well, my colleague on the planning board.
Hi, Meredith. How are you? Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you, Chair Leonard and Board of Appeals members. I spent many hours today watching your meetings, and I have to say, this is a very, very challenging one. It was sort of a brain-bending exercise for me. I was looking at the zoning for this area and looking for comparable projects and doing an exercise of looking at potential conditions we have done on other projects. And my heart and mind go out to all of you because this one is so very challenging. I just want to recognize that you are all volunteers who've spent many hours grappling with this unique and very real challenges. And if there's any way that the planning board can be helpful, please know that we would be happy to help in any way that we can. We all understand that getting this project to be the best that it can be is key for this whole area of town and our town as a whole. I have a punch list of points I can talk through. And I also have Meredith Hall on as well. I'm sure she'll jump in. I thought I would start with parking. I know that's one of the biggest topics on this, but I've been on the planning board for 5 years now, and I can't recall a single in-depth discussion about East Milton where the issue of parking and loading and delivery area issues has not come up. But I would argue that that is even more of a reason that the responsibility of this project to provide adequate on-site parking is especially important because there's no place for overflow to spill out to. If you don't get the parking ratio right, it will undoubtedly spill into the neighborhood. And the need for affordable housing is very real in our state and our country. And so is the need for the safety of the citizens that will live there and the citizens that already live there. So that affordable housing need has to be balanced with safety. So if there's not enough parking and there is an overflow issue, then that compounds a traffic issue as people end up driving around looking for places to park in the vicinity. I am guilty of this myself. In fact, I'm one of those people in East Milton driving around all the main and side streets, slowly stopping, starting, pulling over, distracted, looking for signage that's just not there. We need to do all we can to not exacerbate the safety issue by providing enough parking for the new residents, visitors, and service providers of this new development. There's no train in East Milton and the bus service is limited. The idea of a parking garage in this area is an obvious one. And in my 5 years on the planning board, there's been discussion, but there's never been a proposal from a landowner attached to an actual property that has come across my desk with a parking garage or an area of significant size and capacity to address any spillover from this site. There are hopes, there are dreams, and one day we all hope someone will come up with a way to create a parking garage, but I do not know many parcels or properties or physical plans to do so. Be a great thing, but there isn't a proposal before us. So we cannot assume that that's a solution in front of us yet. I know there's a lot of us working toward that. It's a big hope of mine. When I looked at that chart in your last meeting, 92 units, 112 parking spots, 40 of the units being 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units, I share the concerns that there's not enough parking in this plan. I took great interest in the idea of transportation demand incentive program, the subsidized T-Pass, the incentive for taking the bus, the blue bike, ride share, all of those things sound real hopeful. I'd love to see data on the success rate of that approach and how much of an impact you can expect. Is it 10%? Is it 12%? Is it 15%? any percentage is good. It would be just really good to know. And so, I'm not requesting that the applicant solve the parking problem in East Milton, but I do believe that any applicant has to absorb the parking needs of what they're proposing to build. Similar to stormwater on a site, they must absorb any stormwater on the site. They need to absorb the parking needs of the site, especially in this location. The glass is full over here. There's no room for spillover parking or spillover water. I heard discussion about parking formulas at your last meeting, and I spent a little time looking at large residential projects in Milton. The best comparables I could find were mixed use. Nothing is really comparable to this site because this site is really unique in size and massing and density. Historically, the standard parking formula had been 1 parking spot per bedroom. That was sort of the starting point. We've looked for a good, like a public good on other projects to sort of, come down. So in other words, come down a percentage. So instead of 2 spots for a 2-bedroom, you could come down to 1.5 spots per bedroom if there was a public good. So I have a couple examples of some larger mixed use densities. And like I said, it's very hard to get a good comparable, but 36 and 50 Elliott Street site plan approval, there were 99 spots for 66 units. And I took a quote from the site plan. The site plan approval said, there shall be reasonably convenient guest parking. 131 Elliott Street, site plan approval, 38 units. Total space is 88. They had 6 1-bedroom spots for 6 bedrooms, 32. They had 32 2-bedroom units times 1.5, so 48. So for the 2 bedrooms, they had a 1.5 spots per 2-bedroom. And then they had a third of the spaces set aside for residents, their guests, and their service providers. So for 38 units, they had 88 spaces. 36 Central Avenue, this was a special permit. 18 residential units had 34 bedrooms, totaling 47 spaces. So that was, they provided 1 spot per bedroom and 13 for customers and visitors. So I was going to try to look at large, strictly residential instead of mixed use, but those seem to be older projects and had similar or even higher parking requirements. And so I tried to look at something more recent. And one of the more recent zoning articles I could find was the Milton Village Mixed Use Planned Unit Development Bylaw. And under number 9, it said, in a Milton Village Mixed Use Planned Unit Development, there shall be a minimum of 1 parking space for each residential unit with such additional parking spaces, if any, as the planning board may determine to be reasonably needed as parking for service providers, guests, and deliveries. And further provided that upon determination that parking in excess of the spaces so computed is necessary, the planning board may increase the requisite minimum number of residential parking spaces to 1 space for each studio or 1-bedroom unit, and an average of 1.5 parking spaces for each residential unit, which has 2 or more bedrooms. Together, such additional parking spaces, if any, as the planning board may determine to be reasonably needed as pairing for service providers, guests, and deliveries. So I mention these examples because I watched your last meeting and I heard formulas being discussed around the 1.5 parking spaces per 2 or 3-bedroom units. And I could follow the logic of that discussion. That language is similar to me and understandable given the history of our larger developments in town. When it comes to stormwater management, I wanted to mention that I agreed with the peer reviewer who agreed with Susan Spratt of Mackenzie Engineering. I thought her recommendations for additional conditions related to more thorough soil testing at the location of the infiltration rate and the seasonal rate is significant here. Our planning board has also received numerous photographs from the citizens over the years showing water flowing down below the site. I just thought our suggested conditions on modeling, looking at the soil horizons, mounding analysis, those are all sort of standard. Our planning board almost always defers to these peer review experts. Basically, all water needs to be absorbed on site. So I thought that all made sense. I also, I thought the part of the discussion about the economic feasibility question was interesting. We've had developers come before our planning board and say that a certain condition would make their project economically infeasible. And, you know, I have no idea if that means their profit margin drops from 40% to 30%, or does that mean the margin drops from 10% to 0%? I have no idea because they have never shared that information. I've asked, and I think it's fair to ask, what does this condition actually mean to the margin? If you're going to claim that it's economically infeasible, then provide the relevant data. I also understand they have share owners who are looking for economic results, but everything else in the plan has to stand up to analysis and review. So it's a little bit of a dance that we kind of do with the developers. And I've found that when we set reasonable, thoughtful conditions based on precedent or law or standard practice or a principle like safety, they're able to go back to the drawing board and figure something out. Developers are often very creative and they have a very good way of solving problems when they put their minds to it. And I know we've been through that dance. It's but I just wanted to say that I thought it was a reasonable question. I know you've had a lot of discussion about density. I was trying to keep track. It sounds like you have 92 units per 47,500 square feet. I was looking at the formula and, you know, the area is zoned for business, but I went and I looked at the formula for mixed use because it just seemed more appropriate because the business it's just described so differently, and this is now residential. But the starting point for mixed use density is 1 unit per 1,000 square feet. So that would be approximately 47.5 units for the site as a starting point. This site has 43.5 more than that. So you have around 90% more density than the starting point for mixed use density. And we have come up from the formula of that 1,000 square feet. You know, I looked at different projects and you come up like 30% for streetscape improvements or affordable units or open space. You know, you almost get a 30% bonus, if you will, but 90% is so dense. So I just see issues with the height and the massing for this transitional property between the business zone or what is likely to become the mixed use zone and the neighborhood. So it doesn't look like anything in the area. The comparables that they had were in Quincy, and I can understand why. We just don't have anything comparable here. It's also very unusual to have 100% lot coverage. I mean, right across the street, you have the Shaughnessy's, the 2-story house. And so it just kind of stands out there. So then I have some just smaller thoughts, and I'm sorry I'm really late to the dance, but I was listening to the discussion about the bollard treatment, and Meredith might actually be helpful in that. But I was wondering if there would ever be any consideration for possibly adding street planters or urns sort of in between the street trees. of sufficient size. And the location and style could be approved by the planning director down the road if Tim was okay. I thought that might help with the issue of the jumping the sidewalk, but I wanted to Meredith to sort of weigh in here because she had some thoughts about those bollards. If I could invite Meredith.
Sure, Meredith Hall, why don't you
Okay.
address the board? Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you so much. And I do want to say thank you for your impressive work as a board on this application. You've been really doing a wonderful job. And I did want, really as a safety concern, I know it was brought up by Mr. Mullen at your last meeting, but I think it's really imperative that there is, and I think bollards are very decorative and nice way to protect the pedestrians. This will be a significant increase in the number of pedestrians in that neighborhood. And the fact that currently neighbors have to walk into the street to walk around delivery trucks is just unacceptable. And I think that's something that from a safety perspective that just should be absolutely required. And then I also just wanted to address some of the further enhancements for the streetscape. Many projects in the town, and I use 50 Elliott as an example because they did a very nice lighting treatment on the sidewalks. I know there's minimal lighting that's going to be on the building, no lighting on the balconies, really at the doorway, the entrances. But so I think it can really enhance the neighborhood, and again from safety to have a dark sky compliant, but a nice decorative lighting. And we were working, Tim and I we can provide some examples of that to the developer that we can get to them if they need. And secondly, there is a real opportunity for welcoming, inviting, I would say stonework and planting beds, particularly in the 30-foot setback that is off of the Franklin corner there, the large setback, to see something that would be done possibly with examples that you see of brick and bluestone, but something that just sort of warms up the entry access to the building. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention, because I know the Falcone and the Corcorans have had a long-standing relationship in Milton. And I know Mr. Bomer's not here tonight, but I would encourage ongoing improvement to the architecture, including further setbacks on the upper levels, and if possible, a real reduction in height in order to make this building more compatible with the surrounding properties. We must remember this is in a historic railway village. And I believe adding some classic elements, even though it can be a modern building, but adding classic elements that would give a real nod to the neoclassic and Georgian architecture on Granite and Adams Street. And lastly, I think they could really look closely at their materials, which is a great way to reduce the effect of massing. For example, using a material that would look like a limestone, a composite, but it would look like a limestone maybe on the first story, which would break the massing into a different material such as brick with some limestone details above. I think that would be a look that would really fit into the neighborhood in that historic location. The last thing that I know the Corcorans and Falcones want to do is just to have a building that really doesn't stand the test of time with their names on it. And I think adding some classic elements, the reduction in the setbacks would really improve and incorporate this building into the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith and Denny.
Could I add a little bit more?
You can have a lot more if you want. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Meredith mentioned light, and I know that there was a discussion that there wouldn't be much light, but I'm assuming that there will be some light in that courtyard and even in the doorways. And I just wanted to, Meredith mentioned this, but on the condition, I would say on-site lighting shall be compliant with the standards of the International Dark Sky Association or equivalent standards. I would say lighting shall be set to the minimum level while still ensuring site safety and security, and lighting shall be set on a timer or motion sensor where possible to prevent unnecessary light spillover. I would continue. Lighting of entries and balconies shall be in the roof or building wall directed downward to avoid light overspill. And outdoor lights shall be placed at or below 10 feet high and pointed downward. Exceptions can be made for site safety with the approval of our town planner. I noticed in some of the renderings you had some of these like lanterns, almost these old fashioned lanterns, and I thought that
So Danny, we submitted on the last submission, we submitted a photometric studies plans that shows you exactly what you're talking about and how we comply with the dark skies and how the lighting photometrics show that we are complying with the safety components as well as not illuminating the dark skies and all of those compliance. So they're all already submitted. And I think that the photometric studies show the light levels being provided not only in the courtyard, but also on the sidewalk areas, which are complying with all of the things that you're already mentioning.
Oh, good. And did you keep the height to a minimum to 10 feet or?
We did comply with the height. Again, I think it's something that we want to work with the city. We didn't know whether the city has any standards about light poles on the exterior and sidewalks. We're happy to comply with that. What we try to do is to really work with exactly what you're saying, the idea of not adding light pollution and minimizing that and being able to just light the sidewalk enough for safety and not really throwing light that would be polluting beyond that. But we are happy to continue dialoguing with the city, but the set of plans comply with the photometrics that we submitted.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Valdez. Denny, do you have any further issues you want to discuss?
Yes, I was just wondering, I don't know if this development has a generator, but I just wanted to suggest that all utilities shall be visibly screened by evergreen shrubs or solid fencing and surrounded by an acoustic enclosure with industry standard sound absorbing materials for any noise making equipment. And I know that you talked about equipment on the roof would not be visible, but another thing that you could request is that it could all be kind of put close together in the center of the roof instead of having it in different places all along the roof, just kind of trying to condense it in the center and putting an enclosure around it. The same idea with the surrounded by, an acoustic enclosure with industry standard sound absorbing materials.
Denny, again, thank you very much for your observation. Again, I think that you are right for that. And I think in the roof plans that we've submitted, we show the centralization of equipment and try to centralize it to make sure that it is away from visual angles from the street. And we provided those angles, but we did try to centralize those, as you said, and try to work to the best of our abilities to minimize the mechanical impacts. As an architect, I hate seeing that as well. And we work our hardest to be able to mitigate that to the best that we can, but we have done that. I think that the plans that were submitted, requested by Cliff, show the locations of all of the equipment on the roof.
Okay, thanks for your comment, Mr. Valdez. Denny, do you want to continue, please?
Sure. I was curious. I noticed you have a lot of street trees, shade trees, and will the program, the project management company be taking care of those street trees? The trees make such a difference because they bring the heat down in the summer and they keep the buildings warm in the winter. And I was just wondering if that's something that the project management is going to take care of afterward, or if that's going to be on the town.
Jen Cochran, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, we'll have landscaping for the site. So yes, those will be tended to by the landscaping.
That's great. So you could add a condition that the street trees shall be planted and you would note the location. And according to this, that's the landscaping site plan. And thereafter, trees shall be maintained in good condition by the project management company in perpetuity at its own expense. And it would be subject to the approval by the town. And then you could add to the trees, you could add some evergreens, because I think the site, I was looking at the pictures, it would be really great to fit a bunch of evergreens into that landscape plan, which you probably have. So I think that's, I would have loved to have spent a lot more time on design. But we could provide some materials on suggested design conditions if there was interest in that.
Well, I think, Denny, we'll have to see where this hearing goes. As you know, this is the last scheduled hearing for this project. And if the time for hearing is not extended, then the evidence is going to be ending this evening on those particular issues. So let's play that by ear, and we'll see where that goes. Okay. Let me, have you finished your presentation?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks for your time and your attention to detail. It's really important on a project like this. Let me see if my board members have any comments or questions. Jeff Mullen, do you have any questions of either Ms. Denny Swenson or Meredith's suggestions for the project?
I think it'd be helpful it's to get the sum of what planning board member Swenson indicated in writing. She was reading from a sheet. It'd be helpful. To get that on the record.
Well, I agree with you. He's suggesting that Denny's notes be made part of the record.
Yeah.
What he suggests that they be formally prepared and submitted.
Her pleasure. Her pleasure.
Well, I'd be happy to. They're pretty good. If you don't mind my bullet list, I'd be happy to share it with you. Thank you.
I think the board would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let me just, Mr. Freeman, let me just ask you, do you have any objections to Ms. Swenson's notes being submitted?
Nope, none whatsoever. Thank you.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry. Could I add one more thing?
Sure.
I noticed that there were some benches in the visuals, and I just thought it would be nice to put in the materials of the benches in your condition. In other words, if they're granite, it would be good to sort of note that. If I could quickly give you a suggestion, but the applicant might be able to answer that. Did you, what was the material of the benches and the visuals?
Jen, do you remember that without?
I don't believe that we've spec'd that out quite yet, but would be more than happy to work with the planning board on finding something that would be appropriate and look very nice for the area, be inviting, and create a nice little mini parklet.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be great. We would love to.
You want to suggest a material?
Well, I would love granite. I think granite would be fantastic. In New England, it's very hard. If you do wood, then it's only going to last for a little while. So some sort of a permanent structure, and it would go really nicely with the green plans that you have.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's ask board member Nicholas Gray whether he has any questions of Ms. Swenson or Ms. Hall.
Thank you. No, I thank them both for taking the time to review the material so closely and for offering their helpful testimony, but I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nick. Let me ask Mr. Freeman, do you have any questions of Denny Swenson or Meredith Hall?
Nope. Thank you. We appreciate their comments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Attorney Bob Galvin, do you have any questions or comments regarding the testimony of Ms. Swenson and Ms. Hall?
No, I just wanted to add to what Ms. Swenson said. We were looking for comparison projects I was involved on behalf of an abutter named Jacob Carlin to the project on Randolph Avenue, which the board may remember was a 90-unit affordable housing project. And that project had 156 standard size spaces. They were parking garages located below the buildings, and some surface parking, but most of the parking was located below the buildings. So that, up until this, was the density standard, I think, for the town of Milton. That's a 9-acre site, 3 of which are upland acres. And that was 90 units on what was functionally 3 upland acres. Now this is functionally just over 1 acre, an acre being 43,560 with 92 units. So there's a significantly larger amount of parking, and it was because of the need for guest parking. And that particular space, there is a bus stop located, I think, at the entrance or the proposed entrance for the MBTA, and they certainly claimed that their transportation management goals would involve a lot of their residents using public transportation too, and that was literally right at the end of the access drive. So again, I think that just goes to our point that there isn't enough parking, and particularly not enough properly sized parking. So I don't have any more to add than what I said in my letter. I do agree with the stormwater concern, Ms. Spratt, when she was indicating that this project didn't comply with the stormwater management regulations, asked for a condition that would require them to prove that they could infiltrate where their infiltration system is located. And if they didn't, they were not able to demonstrate compliance with the state standard. And, you know, they were adding additional stormwater volume, albeit at a lesser rate, to an area that's already not functioning properly, and that was going to contribute to flooding. And I put that in my letter, so I won't belabor that point. But as much as parking is a problem, flooding is also a problem in this neighborhood, and there are multiple stories of those problems creating existing problems, and this is going to add more stormwater there. I'm not talking about connecting to sewerage, which I understand has the capacity. I don't dispute that, and we've never focused on that, but no one has ever evaluated the condition of the offsite stormwater management system that they're proposing to add into, and which we suggest is already surcharged.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Galvin. Mr. Sean Reardon, do you have any questions of Denny Swenson or Meredith?
I don't. I was hoping to go back and add a little bit more clarifying testimony related to the clearance when I could.
Okay, why don't, if you have no questions regarding the planning board issues that were raised, then why don't you have the floor on the clearance issue?
So after that,
John, I'm sorry, John, can I just, can I just ask one question about what Mr. Galvin said, because we've got Mr. Reardon right here?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Mr.
True that we've never looked at the stormwater?
no, we've looked at stormwater.
Okay. That's been part of your peer review.
Yeah, but there are, to Mr. Galvin's point, there are some outstanding issues that we recommended having conditions that they submit a final set of plans addressing those issues. And we think they are addressable.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Reardon, why don't you pick up the ball on the clearance issue that you wanted to discuss?
Yeah, so I felt a bit uncomfortable after my exchange with Mr. Mullen about my command of the subject matter. So I Googled a little bit while the others were talking, and I found the Ryder Truck website, which suggests that a 16-foot rental truck requires 11 feet 6 inches of clearance, and a 16-foot rental truck is suitable for a large 1-bedroom unit. Any truck bigger than that requires more clearance. So I do question whether or not now that 10'4" is adequate, but also just as a frame of reference, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the East Street Bridge in Westboro or Westwood that, you know, trucks get caught under quite often. the clearance on that bridge is 10'6". So in terms of sort of where it fits, there's a bridge out there in Westwood that's notorious for hanging up trucks, but also, most of the normal traffic gets underneath it. So we are talking in that range of sort of plausibly serviceable, but certainly we would expect the applicant to consider that as part of their design.
Well, I appreciate that, but that was the whole thrust of my question. It seemed to me the average reasonably sized moving truck can't get in there.
I think the information I saw suggests that as well.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure how that works, only because there is no viable alternative, at least not one that's been identified. So that's a concern I have.
Okay, either Jen Corcoran or Mr. Valdez, do you want to address that issue of the clearance going to 11 feet rather than 10.4 feet?
We can definitely continue looking at that once we start getting into the details with the design of the structure and how we can minimize that and enhance that. I mean, I think that we can definitely address the idea of adding those inches that, Sean is putting forth. I think that it is a solvable solution. I think that we looked at all of the U-Haul trucks when we were doing that. We didn't look at the website for the trucks that you were looking at, Sean, but we can definitely work to address that issue. And once we start getting into the structural details, we can try to find ways to deal with that component to allow for that.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. So let me ask Mr. Freeman, do you have any further evidence to offer in support of this particular application?
No more evidence or testimony. At the end, if we do reach an end of the hearing tonight, I would certainly like to make just a brief few final comments.
Okay, then Mr. Galvin, I take it that you're going to stand on your February 10th, 2022 letter as amended by your testimony this evening. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is. And I just wanted to mention, I still think the board could look at the economics of this, but I won't belabor saying it anymore.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Zawinski, on behalf of the town, is there any additional evidence?
No, there isn't.
Okay, then let me ask Bev Sutton whether there are any members of the public who have their hands up and want to be heard on this application.
Yes, we'll start with Jim Coyle.
How many do we have?
Well, right now 2, but we just opened it up, so.
Okay, so let's do this. It's 20 minutes of 9 at the present time. So we'll open up public comment to Jim Coyle. And what I request really is those citizens that have taken the time and effort to submit written materials to the board, their evidence has been submitted. It's part of the public record. It's going to be considered by the board. So that I think let's start out by doing this. We'll set to make sure we get everyone who wants to be heard. We'll set a time limit like they do in some city council meetings of 3 minutes, which we can expand if it's really needed. But let's try to keep our public comments to 3 minutes, and we'll see how things go. It's 20 minutes of 9 at the present time. So Mr. Coyle, welcome back to the Board of Appeals. Why don't you identify yourself, and we're delighted to hear from you.
Sure. My name is Jim Coyle. I live on Bunton Street, and I did submit an email earlier today. And just following up with a couple of points on that tonight. I live on a small side street, and we probably get, with about 8 or 10 houses, we get numerous delivery vehicles, and I think that's the way the world is right now. I want to correct one point here. I get UPS deliveries 2 or 3 times a week. They're 10'6". Every single one of them, they're standardized. So I think the architect needs to do a more complete job looking at all the vehicles and get back to Mr. Reardon for final approval on that. And secondly, for Ms. Pike here, I'd like to know, what is a typical volume of delivery trucks, especially in a world where people are being encouraged to work from home, and Ms. Corcoran was expecting that. She said that in one of her earlier statements. So I think that's, what is the volume of trucks? It could be, 20 or 30 easily in a building like this. Second thing, the environmental cleanup. I put this at point number 5 in my letter there. Right now, I checked with the DEP, and I've said this before, I never really got an answer. This site has been used only for industrial and commercial uses for well over 100 years. It is being converted to a residential use. I think it's a normal practice, it certainly is in my line of work, to do an environmental site investigation. I've asked for this before, it has never been done, and I think it should be an absolute condition of this project. And related to that, there's a environmental monitoring wells and the Abbott Court end of the project there that's under a limited use restriction. Again, the applicant should be required to look into that and report back to the board for review by Mr. Beard, since that's his line of work. Drive-throughs here is point number 7 on my memo here. Quincy and South Boston require all new projects to have a really good drive-through. So I think that's off street and out of Franklin Street. I can easily see a backup. If you have 6 or 7 delivery vehicles at the same time, it's not going to work the way we're designing right now. They'll be lined up, backed out on Franklin Street where there's no parking allowed. And I referred to, I think I made my main points here. If the board and Mr. Reardon can look at my my memo from earlier today, it's all about public safety. That's my emphasis.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Robert Galvin. I represent the
sorry, Mr. Galvin.
The applicant appellant Antonio Shoam. We understand that the board doesn't have a full board tonight, and discussed that with my client, and we would like to go forward, and I do appreciate and understand that
some type of
will need to go forward with town council and
Somebody
obtain
has,
their review of the matter.
It's Attorney Galvin, and he's
but I
trying
think
to
we would like to
testify
go
at my
forward.
ZBA meeting this evening in Duxbury.
Okay, well, everyone, can
you-
everyone just mute, please?
Okay, I think,
Okay.
is Mr. Coyle still there?
Yes, I think I'm finished. So
Okay.
it's just.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Coyle. Let me just see if we're able to have Ms. Pike answer one of the specific questions you asked about the typical number of trips that one can anticipate for a project of this size. Are there any generally recognized statistics on that particular point, Ms. Pike?
There are. I have not done that calculation for this project. I was actually just looking for my spreadsheet after he asked the question. So I can see if I can get that math for you while you're hearing from others, if that's all right.
Okay, that'll be helpful. And just if I forget to do it because I'm bouncing around here, don't be afraid to tell me you're still there and still looking.
Very good.
Nev, whom do we have next?
Kim Conroy?
Jim Conroy? Okay. Kim. Oh, I'm sorry. Miss Conroy?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well. Why don't you tell us your address and we'll give you 3 minutes to be heard.
No problem. 19 Emerson Road.
Yep. Welcome to the board.
Thank you very much, sir. So outside of income for the property developers, the only benefit I heard tonight is adding to the affordable housing options in Milton. And though I understand the importance of affordable housing and Milton's need to increase our affordable options, it seems that in agreeing to such a massive housing structure, we may be fixing one problem, but creating or at least adding to several more. I don't feel the compounded congestion and parking shortage created by the size of a development was adequately addressed tonight in this or any other prior meeting that I've joined. And respectfully, I know that Jen Corcoran, said that Vance of Abbey Park in Novara was comfortable with the current plan and the parking impacts on him. But I wonder if our town representatives have met with him or any of the other small businesses in our square, or are, as without them and their success, we're just a congested area, residents really offering very.
Can I stop you for 1 second? I think Tim Szynski indicated that he had met with Abbey Park and Mr. Welsh on this issue, along with the applicant.
I'm sorry that I missed that. I just, if we harm these businesses, we're offering so little to the homeowners or renters who opt to live in East Milton because of all that a town square offers. So as a resident who lives directly behind the square, a homeowner, a parent, a town meeting member who's vested in the long-term health of this community, I'm very concerned about the current plan, the impact on the safety of our neighborhoods tucked in behind the square, and the health of the businesses that we maintain in the square. As a reminder, we're a suburban community, a town, not a city. And looking at the rendering shown earlier of the delivery trucks trying to offload while wedged into this neighborhood loaded with children and young families, frankly, it's very scary. I'm sorry if I missed it, but how would a fire truck be able to fit in there in case it's needed? Or do we even have ladder trucks big enough to assist in a fire of a building of this size? I drive a minivan and I can tell you how tight these side streets are, and that's not even considering inclement weather of ice and snowbanks. Frankly, it's infuriating. I've been to many of these meetings stemming back to pre-pandemic times when we met in the church on the corner of Adams Street. And there's only been an increase in units. I think at one point we were looking at units in the 60s, and it's more we voice our concerns, the greater the numbers have gotten. With rising costs, significant capital needs of our schools, town, and town maintenance, any stakeholder who cares about this community should focus on our efforts toward increasing our commercial tax base, not bringing 140 new people and beds to a community whose infrastructure is already bursting at the seams. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Conway. We appreciate your testimony. Bev, whom do we have next?
Warren, it's 160 Alvin Ave.
Okay, is it Mr. or Mrs.?
It just says Warren.
Okay, we'll find out. Mr. or Mrs. Warren, can you identify yourself, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I am Warren Lizio, L-I-Z-I-O, and I live on Alvin Avenue, 160.
Good. Welcome to the board. You've got 3 minutes, sir.
Great. Thank you. I think this is a matter of practical sense, really. If the intelligent people on this call have to ask so many nuanced questions about the parking, it has to be because it doesn't compute. The suggested explanations that there will be no significant impact on the surrounding parking seem to me like an exercise in trying to reason ourselves away from common sense. Every concern raised was valid. How many people on this call can park a large moving truck in that garage space? How many people will need that one space on the first of the month? An average of 30% of the apartment community will turn over in a year. That averages 3 per month. But realistically, between May and September, when moving happens, that's actually 5 to 7 moving trucks on the first of the month. If the apartment communities I oversee, in the apartment communities that I oversee, if I held the front door open for an Amazon delivery person, he or she would smile and drop the package right there. They are on the clock and they are not driving into that garage. This project needs at least one more level of parking, given the density that's proposed. These points and the concerns raised before are obvious. Without adequate parking, the overflow will literally crush the local businesses. I will also add that this board has no ability to regulate or enforce the management of the proposed development once you vote. Your ability to mitigate the impact of the development ends here. I challenge the ZBA to think about this design in practical terms. This project shouldn't feel like a punch in the gut. It should be something we can be proud of and pass on to our kids to make East Milton a desirable place, a desirable destination to be at. And that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Lizzie. I appreciate your appearing and talking. Bev, whom do we have next?
We have Ann Corso.
Okay, Ms. Corso, are you there?
Yes, I am. Ann Corso, 78 Antwerp Street in Street in East Milton. I agree with many of the comments of the previous callers, and there still seem to be many issues that need to be really looked into more specifically before anything is approved on this. Looking at an article last week in Milton Transcript, I know that there was, I think it was from Peter Freeman, mentioning about that within the policies recommended by the state that they've exceeded and guidelines, but that the return on the investment is about 5%, and it says about the lowest a developer can go. But a couple of years back, when Mr. Falcone was just endeavoring on this himself, they were going to be profitable when it was only 62 units, when they were going for the 3 to 4 story high building. So I don't know why that there are, with all the concerns that and all the issues, that they can't realize that the size of this is much too big, too many units and too much height for 1 acre of land. You know, this could work on 3 or 4 acres somewhere else, but this is right in the middle of a neighborhood. So I would hope that the Falcone Cochrane Association, that they could then work together and work with the neighborhood, because I really think the neighbors aren't being heard. This is just a business deal and they're ready to go with it. And I think they need to be more concerned with how this is going to affect people's lives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Corso. Appreciate it very much. Beverly Sutton, whom do we have next?
We have no more attendees. Denny has her hand up though.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh. Denny, I'm sorry, Denny. We do have one more attendee, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
And who was that?
The Shaughnessy family? That's
Hello,
all.
how are you?
Hi, we're well. Welcome to the Board of Appeals. Why don't you identify yourself by your name and your address, and we'll give you 3 minutes to be heard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shane Shaughnessy, 30 Franklin Street, speaking on behalf of myself and my husband. I'd just like to applaud Denny for her comments and her suggestions. I'm a numbers person, and to hear the breakdown that she just did with the amount of units on the square footage of the land, and that the developers are at 90% capacity of their density over the capacity, is astounding. And I want that to resonate with people. They're more than double what should fit on less than 1 acre of land. I obviously submitted on behalf of me and my husband a letter to the board today. So I know I'm already on public record. I do have a question, and I don't know if this is the proper time to be heard on this, but there's been no mention of a shadow study, and that is a big concern of ours. We, as you know, we live directly across the street from this monstrosity, and we are surrounded by 13 windows, 2 bedrooms, my 2 daughters and me and my husband's, my children's playroom, and our living room. And this is what we look out to. And we have sun come in this house all day long. And that's one of the things that we love about our home, how bright it is and how cherry it is. And no one has mentioned a shadow study. If you're proposing that this is going to stand as tall as the smokestack that we look out to every single day, where is our light going? Can anyone speak on behalf of that? Has that been a study? Has this been asked about? I mean,
Well, let me
tell you for hours.
Jonathan, let me mention this. My recollection is there's been at least 1 or possibly even 2 shadow studies that have been entered into evidence that are on the public record. But that's a good question, and let me see if Jen Corcoran can address that issue on shadow studies.
Thank you.
Yep. We submitted the studies. I mean, they do speak for themselves. We did submit the shadow studies. You're right, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Could you speak on behalf of that? Because we don't all have that paperwork right in front of our faces all the time. So I'm just curious for us and our surrounding neighbors, what that's going to do and how that's affecting our home.
Well, let me do this rather than pose that question to Mr. Freeman, who's a lawyer like me. Let me see if I can put Sean Reardon on the hot seat Sean, I don't know whether you remember the shadow studies, but perhaps you can you address them or help us as to how they affect neighboring properties?
I wish I could, Chairman Leonard. I'm a dirt and utilities guy. The shadow studies are a bit outside my lane, so
Okay, then
I can't say anything actually.
okay, I accept
Ms.
that.
Corcoran, do you have anything on that?
I mean, who's the,
I know we did submit it, I believe, back in October, and all of the information is on the town website. If you go to the Board of Appeals, to the 40B folder, and then the folder that is residences at East Milton, I believe it was submitted again in October. I don't know off the top of my head right now, and I don't know how I would accurately describe that in words.
let me ask Ms. Corcoran just a second. Mr. Valdez, I don't know whether you're a shadow study expert or whether you remember what they show, but without trying to pull out the shadow studies, are you able to help Ms. Shaughnessy as to what they
we've created 2 sets of shadow studies that we've introduced to the town that show all the different components. I do not know exactly where the sorry that mispronounces the Shawnee's family lives and where their house is located, but the
We
shadow
are 20
studies.
feet from the property. We're right across the street on the Bassett Street side, and our front door is Franklin Street.
Yeah. I mean, so again, I think that's, as Jen mentioned, the shadow studies have been public record. They're on the website, and you can see the surrounding neighborhoods and the surrounding houses at the different scenarios that we did for it. You can see how that impacts that. Without having it in front of me again, I can't see that, but it did show the impacts of it, and I think it did not raise any red flags on the impacts of that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Valdez. I apologize for putting you on the spot, but I thought we could perhaps get an answer. Ms. Shaughnessy, do you want to tie up your remarks?
I won't keep you for the rest of the evening. I could go on for a very long time, but my email is on there on record, and I just hope that the board does listen to the neighborhood, and I appreciate all of your efforts and all of your time on this.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Hutton, do we have any other member of the public who wants to be heard?
We do. Mr. Coyle.
Well, is this the same Mr. Coyle who has already been heard?
I believe so.
Is this Jim Coyle again or somebody else?
It's Jim Coyle.
Right. Yes. No, I'll be very quick here.
Thank you, Mr. Coyle.
I just want to make one simple point here. It's been mentioned that the information is available to the public. I take issue with that. I filed a complaint to Ms. Sutton a couple of months back there, asking the applicant to split up. They file everything in one large document with a variety of sizes between architectural drawings and letters. The general public can't look at that at home on their computer at all. It just doesn't work. And I asked for it to be split up into separate documents, of all the letters on one thing, on a whole series of documents, as is done in Quincy. I followed up with the planning department. They weren't interested in even talking about it. So I think the town as a whole, this board and the planning department have really been not made a very good effort to make the information available to the public. So when this board says, well, go back and look at that, we just can't do it. I went over to the town offices, to the planning part a couple of times. Mr. Zawinski said that, well, come over here. There's a large set of drawings you look at. I've been over there a couple of times. Nobody could find anything. That's really unfair to the public and how we make our comments.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Coyle?
Sure.
Are you a member of the East Milton Neighborhood Association?
Yes, I am. Well,
Okay.
actually, I'm a member of that, yes.
Okay, so you're represented by Attorney Robert Galvin, who is one of the experts in the field, who would have all of those documents available in his office. And you could get onto his office and get the documents if you couldn't get them from the town. So have you made any efforts to go to Mr. Galvin's office or have him send you portions of the documents you couldn't access on your computer?
in the Zoom conditions, that's nearly impossible. I asked this board through Ms. Sutton to have them split up into separate.
I understand that, but you've got a lawyer, Mr. Coyle. You're blaming the board and you're blaming the town when you've got a lawyer representing you who can send you whatever specific documents you want. I will tell you this, sir, you're not alone. I received a title search today that was over 200 pages long, and I had to plow through it, and it was very difficult and it was very time consuming, but it can be done. It's just very, very tedious. So if you wanted a specific document and you can't get it from the town for whatever reason, and you don't want to spend 3 hours looking on the computer, pick up the phone and talk to Mr. Galvin and he will get it for you. That's it.
May I interject?
Sure, go ahead.
I've let it known on numerous times that we have hard copies available in the selectman's office and in the building department. So if anybody wants to come up and receive a hard copy, which is when you come into the office, it's right there. I've left it there for whoever wants to come in and see it. The hard copies, you don't even need to ask for them. I've left them on out for the public.
Okay, thank you, Bev. Other than the document issue, Mr. Coyle, do you have any other remarks you want to finish up?
No, I don't. I think the shadow study there, I think Mr. Galvin, I don't know if he's still on here, but has filed questions about the shadow studies in the past there. And I don't think we ever, as a neighborhood, have ever received an adequate response at all. So I'll leave it at that.
Good, thank you very much. Appreciate your comments, Mr. Coyle. Ms. Sutton, is there anybody else who's a member of the public who wants to be heard?
Yes, Andrew D'Amato.
Okay, I should say this, it's 5 after 9.
Yeah.
And I do know that Mr. Freeman wants to make some closing remarks. And Mr. Galvin may want to make a closing remark or two. And before that happens, I do want to hear from Judy Barrett. We're probably going to have to end public comment at 9:30 if we don't end it after this person. So go ahead. Who is this, Bev?
Andrew D'Amato.
Mr. D'Amato, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. I sort of take a little bit of objection to.
Will you take a little time and tell us where you live?
Oh yeah, sure. 26 Pierce Street. I'm a town meeting member, precinct 7.
Good. Welcome to the board.
You know, these hearings have been going on a long time. As a matter of fact, I think they went through the Delta and the Omicron variances, and I think a lot of people may not want to make a trip to someone's office or even to town hall. So I don't think it was really unreasonable to ask the town to break that file up, but that's here nor there. That's not really why I called. I do think that the issue of the parking in the parking lot and the debate is still going on meeting 22 is just an indication that there are still some very unresolved issues in that parking lot. And I heard earlier from the development team, a lot of we hope, we think, we anticipate, it should be, it might be statements. For a building that is going to impact the neighborhood as dramatically as this one is and be there for generations, I really think we should have some definites and we should have the confidence in those statements, not it might be. And I don't think we're there yet. And that's basically all I have to say. But thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. D'Amato. We appreciate your comments. Bev, anybody else present who wants to be heard?
No, we are all set.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll end the public comment portion of this hearing. I noticed we have Judy Barrett present. Judy, before we hear from the attorneys and there any little closing statement they want to make, do you want to be heard on any issue that we've discussed tonight?
only in that I think that if the hearing is going to close, the hearing is going to close. And I just think it needs to be clear to everybody that once the hearing closes, the board will not be communicating anymore with the applicant or the abutters or anybody. So if that applicant is willing to, wants to go forward with closing the hearing, that's your choice. But any opportunity to review draft conditions or anything like that is not going to happen. So we would need to do the best we can based on the evidence that you've provided and you know, from the abutters and other people who are interested in the case to try to, you know, prepare a decision or a draft decision for the board to deliberate. You know, if you want to be party to some discussion about the conditions of approval, then the hearing needs to be continued. And I think that's really all I have to say.
Okay, well, that's short and sweet. Thank you very much, Ms. Judy Barrett. Mr. Peter Freeman, do you want to?
I'm sorry, John.
Sure.
before
You have
we
any
go to the
comments?
close-
Oh, I'm sorry. Jeffrey has a comment.
Before you
Go
go to
ahead.
the close, this
Jeffrey.
might help. This might give Mr. Freeman the opportunity to hear what I have one more question, and that is, I'm going to drill down and explore this idea of this MBTA issue only because while I completely appreciate the testimony that it's not well used and we actually don't have good service, we also don't have a lot of good options with this parking problem. So to me, anything that can happen that could increase the guest parking supply is something that we really need to explore. And I think the applicant doesn't disagree with that. The question I have is this. I wasn't aware, maybe I should have been, the economics of the parking. If you rent here, you're going to pay a rent plus a parking fee, right? And then my comment was, if you opt out of that, you should get a T subsidy. Like that's the idea, right? So just try to drive that down. And then further thought was, if you do opt out, that spot that would reserve for your unit becomes a guest spot. That's an idea, you know? So this is the kind of, I'm sorry? All right. My question is this, does that also apply to the affordable units?
No, the affordable units would be set by the state figures based on HUD figures. And the rent is limited to include the allowed rent, and it includes a formula prorated portion of the utilities. In other words, it's not, they can't pay the rent that's set and then on top of that be made to pay for utilities. It's all incorporated in, so they also could not be made to pay for parking on top of that.
Right.
So was your plan to not charge the affordable units for the parking?
They can't.
We can't charge them any additional beyond what the allowed maximum rents are, which includes utilities.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let me just ask Peter Freeman if you have any comments or suggestions to what Judy Barrett was suggesting about.
Sure. The only kind of distinction that I would suggest is I agree, and we do, and I think we discussed it at the last hearing, we do think it's appropriate to close the hearing. To the point that Judy made, you know, I had asked several months ago if it would be helpful to, you know, draft a decision. And at the time, it might have been premature in terms of where you were all leaning because there was more information and responses being developed. I certainly acknowledge that. It is certainly true that when the hearing is closed, there cannot be testimony. But I've worked with many municipal attorneys, and I can't speak for all of them or speak for your own municipal attorney, but it is not at all uncommon, and I don't think considered a violation of open meeting law, to have draft decisions, whoever drafts it, circulate it with counsel for the applicant. In this case, because there are many people represented by Bob Galvin, I would certainly extend that. I think it would be wise for you to do that if you agree with me, so that we do think it's appropriate at this point to close the hearing. And I would hope that whoever drafts the decision, you would allow it to be shared by, as it goes along, shared with Bob Galvin and myself, and we could send in suggested revisions, and ultimately, of course, you folks decide. So I think that that's the appropriate procedural way to handle it, which in my experience and understanding is perfectly legal.
So may I address that, Mr. Chair?
Yes, you can, because I want to speak on that issue as well. Go ahead, Judy.
We did in the other two 40B cases, and to be consistent, we need to do it this way as well. As the board was reviewing drafts, they were available for people to see. They just weren't discussed with the applicant or the neighborhood, but they were certainly available. You know, it's public record, the board was discussing it. So I'm not suggesting that the decision not be available for someone to see, but the hearing is closed. There's not any more discussion with the parties. And I think it's generous to say, well, Attorney Galvin can see it, but this is a public hearing. And so you don't know, and you can't control whether there are people on that attendee list who are not clients of Attorney Galvin. And so who represents them if you start trying to have a conversation about this decision? So it's not appropriate, but the board's drafts certainly can be available to people. We did that before. I don't have a problem with that.
Well, let me suggest this, Judy, because I'm not sure that I totally agree with that.
Okay.
I think that certainly if requested, the board would allow and encourage Attorney Freeman on behalf of the applicant to submit a proposed decision. And then likewise, Attorney Galvin on behalf of the East Milton residents certainly has the ability, well, we'll give him the ability, I think, I'll talk with my fellow colleagues here, the opportunity to submit a draft decision. Then it's up to the board to take those draft decisions and to look at them, analyze them, decide what to follow, what not to follow, and to then prepare its own decision, okay? And now I agree with you. I'm sorry, you keep shaking your head.
It's fine. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, go ahead.
I agree with you that as the board takes those two drafts and takes perhaps a draft from Tim or from you or the town or whatever, to craft its own decision, that's part of the public process. And Mr. Galvin, Mr. Freeman, the public, whomever, have the opportunity to see the draft as it's being transferred back and forth and all of that.
Sure.
In my view, but let me finish now. But once having submitted their proposed decision, we're going to continue to work on our final decision, but we're not going to take further comments from Mr. Freeman or Mr. Galvin as we go through the writing on the preparation of that final report. We're not going to take suggestions, comments by the public. That's going to be our job as administrators to prepare the decision, taking into account their suggestions and entering a final decision that comports with the vote of the board on these various issues. So that's how I anticipate this going down. And at that part, once they submit that draft decision for our consideration, the interplay between the board and the applicant and the representative of the town, strike it, the East Milton Neighborhood Association, is over.
Right.
Then it's in our hands, and then we end up doing that. So let me just ask, so that everyone's on the same board and we know what's going on here. Jeff Mullins, do you agree with what I said as to how this decision is going to be prepared? Mr. Mullen, are you there? Mr. Mullen?
Oh, I heard you.
Do you agree with that? Once they submit the draft decisions, then it's up to the board to take those draft decisions, prepare our own decision, considering their suggestions. But the iterative process between the board, the applicant, and the East Milton Neighborhood Association is over once they submit their draft decisions. We're not going to be going back and forth 55 times on our final decision and having everyone make comments on it.
Right.
Is that right?
I agree with that. That's what we did in the other one. Absolutely.
Okay.
You are you inviting decisions right now by a certain?
No,
date?
I think Mr. Freeman is suggesting that he would like to submit a draft decision. I don't know whether
By
that's.
when?
Well, we don't know that. I don't even know whether he's going to want to submit a decision. If he does, I'm going to ask him just that. And I'm going to do the same for Mr. Galvin. But
We
I
got a
want,
series of conditions in from Galvin already.
I understand that. I understand that.
Okay.
So, but in general, the way I described the decision writing process, are you in agreement with that?
That would be fine.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray, do you agree with the way this decision is expected to be prepared based upon my comments?
Yes, I think so. I mean, obviously, the board is the final say as to what the actual language is, and I wouldn't want it any other way.
Okay. And do you have any objection to Attorney Galvin or Attorney Peter Freeman submitting in a timely manner a proposed draft decision?
No, I think they can submit that, and we'll take it under advisement.
Okay, I agree. Okay, let me go back to Mr. Freeman and then ask you, Mr. Freeman, on behalf of the applicant, do you want to prepare a proposed draft decision for the board? You're not obliged to in any.
No, I understand, but I do it quite often and I would be happy to. And please don't laugh because I'm not saying this facetiously, but I would also be happy to work with Bob Galvin. I know we may have differences in the blank spots as to certain final decisions. But in terms of conditions, based on the facts, which, the facts are the facts, I would be happy to work with Bob. We may not submit a joint document, but I say this, as I say, not facetiously at all, but Bob and I just worked on a project in another town where I represented the applicant and he was town council. And I honestly don't remember who did the first draft, but we drafted it together essentially and worked on it. So, I make that, offer to Mr. Galvin, but either way, if they come in as separate documents, that's fine. But yes, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. And let me put the onus on Mr. Galvin. Mr. Galvin, do you agree with Mr. Freeman? And do you want to submit either a proposed combined decision or a separate decision on behalf of the neighborhood association?
I would.
Well, under no obligation to do that.
I would like the opportunity to, but I'm concerned that if you close the hearing, you can't take a draft decision from Attorney Freeman or me, or else, or for anybody else's concern. So I think if you are inclined to do that, you have to leave the hearing open and you'll need an extension.
Why do you say that, Bob? Because
it's a submission.
It's not evidence. It's like a trial. After the trial is over, jury waived. Why doesn't a judge, and don't they do it customarily in the Superior Court, give the parties an opportunity to file either a memorandum or a draft decision within some time frame?
I agree that we've been conducting this like a trial, but if you close the evidence tonight, a draft decision, believe it or not, is considered part of the evidence. It's part of the argument of a trial, and all that would remain.
But the argument isn't evidence. I don't know any theory of law that says an argument is evidence.
But I may disagree with you respectfully. Okay.
You can disagree. Let me ask Peter Freeman. Mr. Freeman, do you agree that if we conclude the evidence tonight, we close the hearing, that it is not legally permissible for you to file a draft decision?
No, I don't agree.
Let me go to my fellow board members. Jeff Mullen, do you have any position on the issue if we close the evidence this evening, whether the parties are barred from filing a proposed draft decision?
I don't know enough about the law on that, John. I tell you, that's not what we did in the other hearing, though.
Right, it isn't.
The other hearing, we got the decision is on the record before we closed the hearing.
And we did that with.
But I can't say I did the legal research to reach a conclusion. That's why I'm struggling with this whole line. That's not what we did. So,
well,
but
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I mean, I could chat by text privately with my client, but I can ask them if they want to talk to me privately. Then perhaps you'd give us 1 minute to do that. But perhaps in this you know, and this might be the answer, if we all, including Bob Galvin, agree that it is legal to keep the hearing open only for the purpose of Mr. Galvin and I, be it individually or jointly, submitting a draft decision, but agree that no further evidence, be it verbal, testimonial, documentary plans, or anything else, be submitted, that might be, you know, a reasonable, you know, way to handle it.
I think that's a very reasonable suggestion. Mr. Galvin, do you want to be heard?
John, if you're gonna do that, you have to open it to everybody, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's fair. I mean, I think that's fine too, but there's more than two parties to this hearing.
That's right.
Well, who are the parties? The public who aren't represented by Mr. Galvin?
Right.
They're represented by themselves, though.
That's right.
You know, I mean, that's the consequence, I think, of doing it that way.
Jeffrey, you can't represent yourself and be represented by an attorney at the same time. We never ask anybody. We haven't defined when the public has spoken whether they're part of the East Milton Neighborhood Association and being represented by Mr. Galvin or not.
So let me, and again, I'm trying to explore, as you all are, to come up with a reasonable solution that we all want to be workable and of course legal. You know, if anyone, to extend it to that, but most likely Mr. Galvin and I, were to submit a draft decision to your town planner, it's up to the town planner whether he wants to, in his capacity as someone advising a zoning board, to share that with you with something that he says, hey, this is good, be it bits and pieces of it or the whole thing. So I'm not trying to do any subterfuge end around. I'm discussing it publicly, obviously, but that's one of the reasons why I don't think it's improper to send it in, you know, because any of you are going to be drafting something and it wasn't shared on the public record, but that's the nature of a decision.
And maybe we're creating a false narrative here when we suggest that if you kept the hearing open only for the purpose of receiving draft decisions, no member of the public is going to be filing a draft decision with the type of complexity and precision and expertise that that Mr. Freeman and Bob Galvin can. And so I don't think we're going to be besieged by 55 draft decisions. But Mr. Galvin, did you?
Sure. I agree with that, but I think, look, as we saw with the number of comments that have come in, a number of those comments are styled in the way of a condition. That's all I'm saying. And if we're going to offer the opportunity for the applicant and the primary party representing the neighborhood to offer a draft decision, that's good. I like that idea, but I think it ought to be extended to if other people have proposed conditions by a certain date, they ought to be provided the opportunity as well. That's all I'm saying.
I don't have any problem with that. It makes sense, but I want to hear from Mr. Galvin.
Yeah, I actually concur with Mr. Mullen. I think if the record is left open for the submission of a draft decision, that anybody that chooses to submit one should be able to do that. And I have seen Board of Appeals leave a record open for the submission of a written document like this before, and I don't have any problem with that. I just think you could set a date certain and, you know, whoever submits, and if it's 50, it's 50. I tend to agree that it will not be 50. It's likely to be 2. So
did you see my email box this week? Today? Yesterday?
I saw the ones that got sent to me, so it seemed like a lot.
Well, you don't have to disclose those, Mr. Galvin. They may be more colorful than the ones we received.
Yeah.
But, so is the suggestion then that you and Mr. Freeman so agree and will submit a stipulation with the board that you'll submit either separate or independent draft decisions by a particular date if we close the hearing tonight?
I would agree to that.
Okay, and let's talk about what's a reason, knowing that you're all very busy and Mr. Mullen is the busiest lawyer on the board. And Miss Judy Barrett is going to bear a lot of burden helping us to review all of this. When do you suggest that you could have a decision or decisions submitted to the board? How many days do you need?
A couple of things. First, before answering that timing question, just to be clear in terms of terminology, but it's also, process. And I asked all members as well as Mr. Galvin, did we agree that the hearing is not technically closed, but everybody agrees and stipulates that anybody who wants to send in a decision can send it in by whatever date we establish? Or is the board comfortable actually, and Bob Galvin comfortable closing it, understanding that at least the lawyers would send in a decision? And anybody too, I don't care who wants to send in draft conditions or anything.
But my impression was that the hearing technically would be open for the purpose of filing that draft decision.
Yes, I
suggest that.
yes, yeah, I'm sorry, I might have misheard you a minute ago. I thought you said close it, but yes, so I'm in complete concurrence with that. That's what Mr. Mullen, Mr. Bob, Bob Galvin, what Bob Galvin said. It must be getting late. So okay.
So how about this? Number one, can we have a date wherein that stipulation will be filed with the Board of Appeals?
Yeah, what I would suggest, and you may be the only one who knows, Mr. Chairman, because you heard this from me on another Milton hearing. I am on vacation starting tomorrow for a full week. So I would say that realistically, normally I would say I'd easily have it in, 2 weeks, but I think realistically that would make it, say, March 3rd, which I know is 1, 2, basically 3 weeks. Just to remind you all, which you probably know, the time to make the decision is within 40 days of when the hearing closed, and this is kind of a hybrid. But if everybody is comfortable with that time frame, we know as busy as you are, you would work on the decision not privately at a public open meeting, obviously, but with no more participation. So if that's okay with all of you, that's what I would suggest. I would like to have said
Can I
earlier.
ask you something, Mr. Freeman? I'm a novice at this, but I'm not comfortable with that. But my question to you, as having expertise in this matter, is if it's going to take 3 weeks to get a draft decision, do you think it's possible legally for the parties to agree to extend that 40-day period by a couple of weeks or something like that to give?
Yeah, the applicant, I didn't mean to interrupt, but the applicant alone could agree with you, just like previous extension. So yeah, that would be fine. That's why I mentioned the 40 days. I didn't want to brush it under the rug.
No, I know you wouldn't, and I feel more comfortable. We'd like to render a decision here as timely as we can, but we also have to accommodate reality. And so let me check with my board members to be sure that they're on board. Both Jeffrey and Nick. Does it make sense to extend if we have the stipulation to extend the time within which the decision has to be filed? Let's say by an additional 2 weeks, knowing we're not going to receive any draft decisions until approximately March 3rd.
Can I make a suggestion, Mr. Leonard?
I
think that technically the public hearing needs to be continued, not the time frame of the 40 days, because the 40 days will then run from March 3rd.
You're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. If the public hearing hasn't closed, you're absolutely right.
I think the only extension you need is from the applicant extending the time frame to like maybe March 4th, and then you have your 40 days.
That's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Well, you should speak up louder, Judy.
Yeah, no, my thinking was a little convoluted there, and thank you, Bob. Yeah, that's fine. Again, with the same understanding that it's not going to be open as the past hearings are for all kinds of testimony and submitted documents. So it's only for these draft decisions.
Right, and you'll file a stipulation with us to that effect, so everyone's rights are protected. Let me just be sure my fellow board members are on board with that. Jeffrey, are you content with that process?
Yes.
Okay, how about Nick Gray?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, when the stipulation would be filed by March, we're going to continue this hearing. We're going to continue it to March 3rd. Is that the suggestion?
believe so.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay, I can do that. I was going to say that will pose problems for me, but it won't. Bev, is March 3rd available here on schedule? Or what day of the week is March 3rd?
That's a Thursday. Yeah, it could be a Wednesday, whatever works for you folks.
Beverly, do we have a hearing on Wednesday, March 2nd? We do. I think I have a hearing on March 2nd.
John, I'm sorry, I was on mute.
We have Randolph Avenue on March 2nd.
I think that's right.
Well, we do. So I would suggest just stick with the Thursdays for now, if we can possibly. Because
Okay.
Tuesdays we have Canton Avenue.
Okay, so what we'll do then is we're going to continue this hearing by agreement of the parties to Thursday, March 3rd. Is that correct?
Yes.
At which time this hearing will open only for the purpose of receiving a proposed draft decision from the parties, and then the evidence, the hearing will close, and the 40-day period will start to run. Have I stated that correctly?
And additional conditions suggested by members of the public.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to add that also. I agree.
Okay. And that's agreeable to you, Jeff?
Yeah.
And to Nick? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do. Let me just ask whether Mr. Galvin and Mr. Freeman, since the March 3rd date is going to be, I'll say, ministerial, not to cause problems. Do you want to make any final comments this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that opportunity. And just briefly, I don't feel the need to do it as you as a fine litigator would do, either with a bench trial or with a jury, to go over everything, because God knows we've gone over it. And that's really my starting point in just a few quick remarks. We do sincerely appreciate and commend the board and the peer reviewers for how thorough it's been. And, we were held to the task, and, we certainly believe that the way it has come out is that we have responded. We've made significant and meaningful changes. One point I just wanted to make, which is a little more specific, is when Mr. Reardon said as to the question of conditions, that he's comfortable with the final stormwater plans to have more details, and that would be perfectly logical to simply cover that by a condition. I agree completely. He had commented, just to remind you, that he's certainly confident that any concerns would be addressed by the condition, and that the final plans would address those. And that is very commonplace in my experience with final details when there's been as much work on those things on something like stormwater and drainage at this point. So we're totally comfortable with that, and we appreciate that. We certainly believe that all of the peer review comments and comments by boards, by the board members and by members of the public, have made it a better project. We think it is a better project to the extent where it is appropriate to grant the permit. And on that score, I would just really remind everybody, including the public, of a couple of things. The select board letter, although largely just attaching the letter from many, many months ago that was sent to the state subsidizing agency, it also does acknowledge the housing plan and how there is such a big need for rentals, especially. And it pointed to statistics that are very typical in affordable housing analysis, and the great divergence between how much people can pay for rents and the median income, even in Milton, and even above the 80% of area median income. So, in fact, our project is still in concert with goals of the town, and even more so, without going into the slideshow that we included the slide on, I think the last hearing. Remember the vision plan that I think Barrett Consulting helped with. There was certainly a vision, not an approval certainly, and not a specific proposal by a developer, but in the vision plan itself for revitalizing East Milton Square and providing housing as well, there was a plan that showed most likely even more intense development, because there was a mixed use discussion. Again, I'm not saying specific proposal. So, you know, it is the site that everybody agrees is perfect for this type of development. Is the devil in the details? Of course, I understand that. But we do think that we've addressed everything. The one final thing I would say is that, you know, it doesn't really help to just talk about density per se and how many units per acre, because that really is not all that helpful. I think that actually Cliff Bomer was very helpful in that. You know, it's basically the intensity of use. If the intensity is too much, and I know others would disagree with me that the intensity is not too much, but it doesn't matter how many units per acre if you take care of the individual issues such as the stormwater and the sewer system and the shadow study, which we did discuss, and it seems satisfactory. We certainly believe it is. All of those factors, including what we've discussed, you know, in terms of the parking and all of those things, the fire chief being now satisfied with emergency vehicles and access for firefighting. You know, when those things are addressed, then that addresses, you know, those types of intensity issues. So we think that it's a proper balancing of the need for affordable housing, which everybody recognizes, and Milton still does need based on the 10% figure, which it's not that close to. We believe that it is what happens in a you know, a fairly intense environment in the location that it is, that has the history that it does have, and that we've answered the questions in a very satisfactory way through a good process with the town, meaning most of all you folks on your peer review. So I'll simply end there, and we thank you for everything. And you know, we do hope that we have convinced you that we should get the permit, a permit for the project that has now been reduced to the 90 units. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Mr. Galvin, do you want to be briefly heard?
Very, very briefly, yes. So I think if you were to ask my clients who live there, they are the persons that are most interested and most impacted by an attempt to revitalize East Milton. And what we have here is the largest and most dense development ever proposed on a site in the town of Milton in this project. I guess I had the privilege, or not so much of a privilege, to have worked on the Randolph Avenue project, which was significantly larger and less dense. At least it seemed like it was the worst project in the whole world to the people that lived around it. But this one, I think, is significantly more problematic. There's too many unknowns. They don't even know what's going to happen to the project the parking from the two restaurants. They know it's not going to be here, and it's 32 or 37 parking spaces that were utilized by these restaurants. And I know where it's going to go. I think we all kind of can guess where it's going to go, and you don't have to have a traffic engineering degree to know that it's going to go to the neighborhood where there's available spaces in front of these people's homes. I think anybody that drives down there using their common sense can see the Franklin Street has a number of other problems, and here we are adding even more loading issues to a project along that street. I've never, if this project were reduced in density, they could probably accommodate some of the loading issues, but it's awkward movements in under a very low overhang. At best, you could have one truck in there or one van in there at the same time. If the truck can't get in there because there's snow in there, which is likely to be the case at some point, it's going to block 3, 5, 8 parking spaces. If there's an ambulance has to get in there and there's a van in there, and there's a pretty good chance that that's likely to happen at some point, you're going to have a problem. The ambulance won't be able to get in. They'll be backing out. And I know 2 to 5 minutes didn't seem like a big deal to some, but it's a life and death situation to someone with a health issue. And I do understand that the fire department is satisfied that the building is sprinklered and they get a fire truck around the perimeter. But on Randolph Avenue, they wanted on a 5-story building to be able to get around the entirety of the building. But apparently they don't need to do that here. I'm not sure I agree with my colleague that this project is significantly better. It's slightly smaller, but it doesn't have enough parking. And I don't think they've solved the stormwater issues at all. I think they have, I think they took 6 months almost without making any plan changes. And the only changes that we see is a reduced parking ratio, a setback of 7 feet on the side of on the Franklin Street side of the 6th floor. And that's just not enough. This building's going to shade the residences on Franklin and Bassett Street. It's too much of a burden to this neighborhood. The conditions that I submitted tonight said use the parking ratio of 1.5, which would give them plenty of guest parking. That's what it's worked in the past. And limit the height of the building to 4 stories. I think if you tested their pro forma, you would find that they could make this work. I didn't, but someone should. And that's what we do in my other communities. We test the pro forma, because when someone says they can't reduce the density of the project because of a legitimate zoning related concern like parking and stormwater, we test that theory, and it really needed to be done. You don't get a second bite at the apple here, you only get one. I've never been able to stop in 30 years a project that received permits that caused a adverse impact on a neighborhood. And I tried with the Big Dig project when I represented some people in West Quincy that were impacted by 10-wheel trucks that were going by every 20 seconds, 24 hours a day. Trust me, you can't stop that. And once this project is built, we'll just be forever trying to chase the solution. So it has to be done now. And I don't begrudge the Corcoran and Falcone families that are stuck with this site, that are trying to make the very best that they can with it, but it's too much to ask to this neighborhood. We're completely fine with a project that has enough parking, that doesn't have a stormwater impact. And we've said that from day one. And they just haven't budged because they say it's going to render the project uneconomic. I just don't believe it, frankly. And I don't think you should believe it either. And I think they wore you out. I think they told you they made a lot of changes, but frankly, they didn't change very much at all. And you saw that frustration in your peer review consultants in November and December. And moving a building back 7 feet and losing 3 additional units shouldn't solve anything. And architecturally, this looks like nothing in the area, and is going to be the dominant building in East Milton. And when they can't leave and get out to the congested areas of Adams and Granite Street, they're going to come through the neighborhood, and you'll hear the complaints. And I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Galvin. We appreciate your comment.
Could I just make a very brief response to a few of the things, especially?
Go ahead, Mr. Frame.
I understand that, we don't want to make it go back and forth and it's getting late, but in reverse order, but in fact, most disturbing to me, to bring up the financial again is beyond anecdotal and hearsay. Basically, he's saying that my clients are not truthful in what they put forward. They worked with a very excellent consultant. We told you that. They've built many projects. They're very experienced. I know the numbers from working with dozens of rental projects. The information was truthful, and the board was satisfied that it didn't seem necessary at that point to go and review it. And for Bob to then go back and second guess it and say he just doesn't believe it, I think is inappropriate and uncalled for, number one. Number two, I also think it's simply a wrong summary of the history of this process to conclude by saying that we talked about changes and we say that we made changes, but we really didn't do anything meaningful. You will recall that not only on the technical peer review things, which is certainly, civil engineering peer review, most of which is above my grade, my pay grade. But, I work on all kinds of projects. I have a sense of that. But more importantly, with Mr. Ballmer's review, I have a background in architectural history and historic preservation and deal with so many projects. I know the kinds of issues that Mr. Ballmer addressed and which were intended to also address the concerns of the neighbor. And I don't need to repeat to you, that he was, in essence, very satisfied and expressed so. And I thank the applicant for the changes that they made that do have a meaningful impact in terms of how the building is presenting now as to how it was originally proposed. So I think that you need to bear that in mind. The parking in some of those situations, it's also just a kind of gimme throwaway general comment to say he knows there's going to be a stormwater problem. Well, that's not what the stormwater experts have said, and even his own expert had very little when all was said and done at the end. One constructive suggestion that was correct about mounding analysis, we've done it, we're doing it. It'll be part of the conditions that Sean Ridden talked about. You know, in terms of just the broadness of the negative impacts, including the restaurant, we addressed it head on. Those are existing situations that we are not exacerbating. The fact that there is a parking situation right now, Mr. Chewinski and Judy Barrett acknowledged to me, it's something that East Milton has been studying, rather that the town of Milton has been studying about East Milton. And so our project is not causing that problem. So I'll rest there and to say that, as you know, but it bears reminding everyone, including the public, that it is a tough balancing test when you have to create affordable housing. But you have gone through the right process to do it. I think you have the information that you need that would support my position on behalf of my clients, that it's a project that will be beneficial and that should be approved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Bev Sutton, if we're going to continue this hearing for the limited purposes of filing a draft decision until March 3rd, we have a case on. Is it 7 o'clock on March 3rd? We have the.
It will be.
So should we continue this to 6:45, or should we schedule it again at 7 o'clock and just make it a 2 or 3 minute hearing?
Well, that's up to the board, but I think being consistent at 7 would probably be best for all.
Okay.
That's up to the board.
We can tell the other applicant, I think it's one of Mr. Shoma's clients, but I may be wrong, that we'll start that hearing at 7:15. Does that make sense, Jeffrey and Nick?
Yes, 7 o'clock.
Yeah, at 7 o'clock, and we'll continue the application that's scheduled to be heard to 7:15. Okay, Jeff Mullen? Mr. Mullen, are you there?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
I was on
so
mute. That's
I
good.
want to thank everyone for your time and patience. Thank the citizens for their grace and their comments and for participating in this process. I certainly, on behalf of the board, want to thank my colleagues, Jeff Mullen and Nick Gray, for their perseverance on this application. I want to certainly thank Bob Galvin and Mr. Freeman for their professionalism and assistance. And of course, Tim was a lot of help to the board. And I think no one has been more helpful to the board than Judy Barrett, who has educated me, if not the other board members, on the technicalities and the importance of some of these procedural issues. So thanks to all of you. And with that, it's 10 minutes of 10, according to my watch. We're going to continue this hearing to March 3rd, 2022 at 7 p.m. For the sole and limited purpose of receiving draft decisions for consideration of the board. We're going to close the hearing on that date, and the 40-day time period will run at the end of the March 3rd hearing, which I would expect to be about 5 or 10 minutes long. Is everyone content?
Yes, thank you very much.
If we are, thanks a lot, everyone, and hopefully we'll get more warm weather. And Peter, have safe flights and all of that. And we wish you the best and look forward to seeing everyone on March 3rd.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Bev. Thank you.
Okay.